Marvel's master of multiversal magic. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction, so please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter, and if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 626 Obey Me, or I won't return your treasure. Gilgamesh was able to retrieve all the noble phantasms he launched using the chains of heaven because they landed in this world. Even the barrier worlds formed by other heroic spirits' noble phantasms belonged to this world, and their laws were within the fundamental laws of this world. But the small world created by George was different. Although it was not yet perfect, it was a completely different world from this one. Without George's permission, the chains of heaven, which Gilgamesh used to automatically retrieve noble phantasms, could not penetrate it. Therefore, in today's battle, every noble phantasm Gilgamesh launched reduced his golden city treasury by 1. The subsequent large-scale, dense release completely wiped out all the weapon-shaped noble phantasms in the treasury. How dare you covet my noble phantasms? Upon discovering that all the noble phantasms in the golden city were gone, Gilgamesh was completely enraged. He had never been so furious before. Never. You see, his greatest hobby was collecting all kinds of treasures. He had spent his entire life collecting noble phantasms, and now almost all of them were gone. How could his fragile heart bear this? Chains of heaven, his magical power erupted, golden light radiating from him, making him as dazzling as a miniature sun, almost blinding. With a roar, 2 chains traversed space, appearing directly behind George and swiftly binding him tightly. Chains of heaven, one of the most powerful artifacts in his treasury. Forged by the combined efforts of the gods, it possessed immense binding power, especially effective against deities. The higher the divinity of a being, the more it was restrained. It could also automatically retrieve all artifacts launched from the treasury. As he bound George with chains of heaven, a uniquely shaped sword hilt appeared in his right hand. The hilt rapidly extended, transforming into his strongest artifact, the Star of Ea. Awaken, sword of the beginning. Gilgamesh raised the sword high, pouring all his magical power into it. The sword immediately emanated a strange red energy and fluctuations of law that caused space itself to tremble. In the beginning of time, in the primordial world, with a gentle downward swing, a crimson blade, capable of splitting the heavens and earth, slashed fiercely towards George, its power far surpassing Artoria's Excalibur. The onlookers were also shocked by the power of this sword, retreating in disbelief, exclaiming how such a terrifying noble phantasm could exist in the world. Don't you need my help? Artoria, who had witnessed the power of the Ea sword before, originally wanted to raise her distant utopia to help defend, but was again stopped by George's telepathic message. Split the heavens and earth, indeed something special, but it's a pity the user's strength is lacking, otherwise I would have a real hard time dealing with it. Looking at the crimson blade, George remained completely calm. In his eyes, this Ea sword was similar to the Pangu axe that separated heaven and earth, indeed possessing the power of laws that could cleave the heavens and earth. Of course, this refers to similar laws of power. The actual power was not on the same level. But no matter how strong the Pangu axe was, if the user's strength was insufficient, it was useless. Just as Pangu could split the heavens and earth with his Pangu axe, while Changxian could only split mountains to save his mother. The sword of Ea in Gilgamesh's hands couldn't even cleave a planet, let alone this entire world. Era burst open, the unlocking spell directly broke the chains of heaven, his right hand transforming into a massive black dragon claw, covered in golden light, grabbing the red blade. He wasn't a god, the chains of heaven were merely sturdier chains to him. With his unlocking spell nearly optimized to conceptual level, he could easily break it. Such a fine noble phantasm is wasted in your hands. Take it. With a forceful squeeze of the black dragon claw, the red blade shattered in midair, shocking Gilgamesh to the point of his eyes popping out. The next second, he saw George's face appear before him, less than 10 centimeters away. Before he could react, the sword of Ea was forcibly snatched from his hand and vanished into the spatial rift. Excuse me, I almost forgot, I'm a mage. I should be more elegant. Seeing Gilgamesh's furious punch coming at him, George initially wanted to give him a good whack, but then remembered that as a mage, Constantly using fists and kicks seemed somewhat unbecoming of his status. So, he raised his hand and a magic circle formed, thunder god slaying magic, 10,000 lightning bolts, continuous penetration, black lightning bolts slammed down on Gilgamesh, striking him before his fist could even touch George, knocking him to the ground. Before he could even get up, one after another, a full 10,000 lightning bolts relentlessly blasted him from the ground into the depths of the earth. When the lightning subsided, everyone looked at the deep pit and couldn't help but show pity. The once dazzling and noble hero king, clad in golden armor, now had his golden armor completely reduced to scrap metal. His body was half charred black, and his golden hair had all been charred and fallen off by the electricity. Only a breath remained, proving he was still alive. God-slaying magic is quite effective against gods. George wasn't surprised by this. Gilgamesh possessed 2/3 divine blood, making him naturally vulnerable to the god-slaying magic. If not for his well-defensive noble phantasm armor, he would likely have been reduced to ashes by now. Behave yourself, and at least you'll suffer less. George didn't kill Gilgamesh but instead gave him some minor treatment. He still needed Gilgamesh's assistance in researching the noble phantasms and didn't intend to kill him for the time being. Hearing George's threat, Gilgamesh revealed a disdainful smile. I admit your strength is indeed formidable, but there's no way you'll make me submit. How could the proud king of heroes be threatened by mere physical pain? He was already dead anyway and had no fear of death. This is a bit difficult. Seeing Gilgamesh's attitude, George stroked his chin. Actually, Gilgamesh wasn't one of the 7 heroic spirits summoned this time, so killing him now wouldn't affect the subsequent plans. It was just a slight pity. Although this guy was arrogant, he still possessed some skill and was worth studying. If you don't obey, you can forget about ever getting back the noble phantasms I took from you. Gilgamesh froze upon hearing George's words. Those were the noble phantasms he had collected his entire life. Actually, this isn't a threat. You can consider it a collaboration. You help me research one noble phantasm, and I'll return one to you. Once I've researched them all, I'll return them all to you, George. Having found Gilgamesh's weakness, patted him on the shoulder and laughed. Chapter 627 Fusion Command Seals. Do you take me for a child? How could I possibly be threatened like this? How could I possibly agree to cooperate for a mere noble phantasm? I'm here to purify this world, Gilgamesh roared inwardly, but his mouth had already subconsciously given the answer. Fine, do you still want to resist? Having dealt with Gilgamesh, George turned to look at Kamar-Taj. Kamar-Taj shook his head. I know I have no chance of winning, but it's a pity I couldn't complete my plan. He could even withstand Gilgamesh's AI without being harmed. The strength of this magician was far beyond his own. Perhaps even the headmaster of the clock tower wouldn't be a match for him. So now he had no choice but to wait for death. However, he wasn't afraid of death. He had no fear of death, only regret that his plan couldn't be completed, that he couldn't enjoy that ultimate pleasure. At least you have some self-awareness. George waved his hand to dispel the mirror world, placed his hand on Kamar-Taj's head, and began to read his memories. Soon, he finished reading about Kamar-Taj's life and learned all the information about the Fourth Holy Grail War, the identities of the remaining 2 masters, and an unexpected gain. I didn't expect this guy to have improved his command seals, allowing him to possess 2 servants simultaneously. At the end of the Fourth Holy Grail War, Kamar-Taj was originally shot through the heart by Kiritsugu Midaya. However, because the servant Gilgamesh was corrupted by the black mud in the Holy Grail and gained a new body, the black mud flowed backwards along the contract, filling the void in his heart and allowing him to survive. After the Holy Grail War ended, without the Greater Grail to provide magical energy, he took in orphans under the guise of the church. In reality, he used these orphans as sacrifices to replenish Gilgamesh's magical energy for continued activity. During this time, he also improved his command seals, making it possible for him to contract a second servant. Therefore, at the start of the Fifth Holy War, he ambushed and killed the Lancer's master, gaining control of the Lancer. With Kamar-Taj's improvements, George's research speed increased dramatically. Having just finished reading all of Kamar-Taj's memories, he had already developed a new command seal capable of simultaneously contracting 7 or 8 servants. With further research, contracting 1 or 200 servants wouldn't be a problem. Command seal transfer, he touched Kamar-Taj's left and right arms, and Kamar-Taj's 2 command seals were immediately absorbed into George's right hand, merging with Artoria's command seal on the back of his hand. I have bad news for you. The Holy Grail has been corrupted. Even if you win the Holy Grail War, you won't be able to fulfill your wishes through the Holy Grail. So, how about we make a deal? Using magic to immobilize Kamar-Taj, George turned to Reincarnated and shared information about the Fourth Holy Grail War. According to the information Kamar-Taj had gathered, in the Third Holy Grail War, the Ainsburn summoned the Avenger-class servants Angramaniu. However, the Avenger was unexpectedly weak, like an ordinary person, and died on the fourth day after the Holy Grail War began. His soul was retrieved into the Greater Grail, and the Grail's colorless power was corrupted by the Avengers, who were formed from evil desires, into the cursed power of black mud. From then on, it was impossible to make a wish. The essence of the Holy Grail War was to travel to the root through this ritual. Making a wish was merely a secondary function. The main principle was that the vast amount of colorless magical power gathered by the Greater Grail could fulfill most people's wishes. Wishes that were too difficult could not be fulfilled. For example, wishing directly to enter the vortex of the root. But now that the colorless power had become the cursed power of black mud, the function of making wishes was naturally lost. No wonder Karatsugu made me destroy the Holy Grail. Artoria, standing behind George, wore a forlorn expression. She had never understood why, in the Fourth Holy Grail War, Karatsugu, who had clearly defeated Kamar-Taj and won, would have made her destroy the Holy Grail with Excalibur. It turned out that Karatsugu already knew the Holy Grail was corrupted, and that if the ritual continued to the end, the black mud would manifest and destroy all of humanity. Therefore, this also means that her wish to rewrite the history of Great Britain is no longer possible. So the fire was caused by the destruction of the Holy Grail. At this moment, Shirawi expression was also very complicated. Karatsugu ordered Artoria to destroy Sanctuary with Excalibur, preventing the black mud from descending, but this also brought about the Fuyuki City fire, burning all his relatives to death. However, he then realized that if Karatsugu had not given this order, it wouldn't just be his relatives who died, but all of humanity. So, Father adopted Shirawi out of guilt, and he didn't come to see me because the clan leader wouldn't allow it. Similarly, Ilya also resolved her doubts and let go of her not. Her father didn't not love her, he just had no choice. What deal? Rin-Tosaka, having digested all the information, looked up at George. Since the Holy Grail War had become like this, there was no need to continue. George threw Kamar-Taj in front of Rin-Tosaka. I'm handing your father's killer over to you. Do with him as you see fit, kill him or let him go, it's up to you. In return, you must transfer your command seals to me. He could easily forcibly take the command seals from Rin-Tosaka, but he preferred a fair deal rather than resorting to violence. Rin-Tosaka didn't immediately agree or refuse, but instead asked, since the Holy Grail War can continue, why do you still want my command seals? Because my goal has never been to make wishes. The wishes I want cannot be fulfilled by the Holy Grail. I collect command seals to study the true ritual magic of the Holy Grail, to find the correct way to reach the root. That's the goal that mages should pursue. George wasn't lying, his goal was indeed to reach the root. But before that, he wanted to study some noble phantasms and learn about the different magic of this world. Alright, I agreed to this deal. Taking a deep breath, Rin-Tosaka nodded. She believed George's words because, after witnessing George's battle with Gilgamesh, she knew that George could easily defeat her. He wouldn't need to make this deal. Moreover, without George's help, she and the archer would definitely not be a match for Kamar-Taj and his two servants. Very well, then you guys deal with this place first. Oh, by the way, there are some orphans in the basement, you guys help them. I'll go transfer the command seals of the remaining 3 servants over as well. Seeing that Rin-Tosaka agreed to the deal, George did not immediately transfer the command seals, but instead disappeared from the spot. Chapter 628 Still eating? We're coming to collect your food. After Shinji Matao, the temporary master, was killed, Cavalry Medusa automatically returned to her true master, Sakura Matao. He had already learned the identities of the mage and assassin masters from Kamar-Taj's memories. Therefore, his plan was to directly deal with these masters, integrating their command seals into his own, thus resolving all problems at once. His first destination was the location of the mage and assassin masters, who were quite interesting. While they could be considered one master, they weren't like Kamar-Taj, who possessed 2 command seals and contracted 2 servants. According to the information in Kamar-Taj's mind, the mage's master in this holy war was the Middle Eastern magician Atram. However, the mage killed her master and then contracted a new master, Sorceress, a teacher at the private Amuratora Academy Middle School and Rin Tosaka's homeroom teacher. Simultaneously, she used her powerful magic to forcibly summon an assassin-class servant, becoming the assassin's master. Therefore, the assassin's master is a mage, and the mage's master is Sorceress. Actually, in the past, the Holy Grail War wasn't highly valued by the Church and the Mages Association. When the three founding families created the Holy Grail War, they didn't say it could lead to the root, they only said it could gather a large amount of colorless magic power to fulfill certain wishes. The Mages Association sent people to observe, and indeed, a large amount of colorless magic power had been gathered, so they approved it, but didn't pay much attention. For the Mages Association, gathering colorless magic power wasn't particularly difficult. Moreover, that colorless magic power could only fulfill some ordinary wishes, not all wishes. The Church was similar, but to prevent the Holy Grail War from affecting ordinary people, they sent people to supervise each war. Until the Fourth Holy Grail War, Kenneth, one of the 12 Lords of the Clock Tower at the Mages Association headquarters, participated out of interest. As one of the 12 Lords of the Mages Association, Kenneth naturally possessed extremely powerful magical abilities, and the Mages Association naturally assumed he would be the final victor. However, the ending was unexpected. The powerful director Kenneth not only failed but was also killed by the other participants in the Holy Grail War. It was only then that the Mages Association truly began to take an interest in the Holy Grail War. They were surprised to discover that the Holy Grail War could summon historical heroes to fight as familiars. This was incredible. The mages were in an uproar. They weren't excited about using these heroes in battle, nor were they particularly interested in making wishes with the Holy Grail. To put it another way, it was like a group of historians who studied history every day suddenly discovering they could summon Qin Shi Huang, Liu Bang, Xiang Yu, and Zhuge Liang from history. Thus, for the Fifth Holy Grail War, the Mages Association requested 2 spots, which were fiercely contested by mages. The final winner was Bezit, a descendant of an ancient magical family and the knightly order to which the hero Koch Yulain belonged. His purpose in participating in the Holy Grail War was to meet his childhood idol, Koch Yulain. Unfortunately, he was ambushed and killed by Kamar-Taj. The other was Atram, the son of an oil tycoon from a newly emerging Middle Eastern magical family, who spent a fortune to buy a spot. His aim was to use Medea's magical abilities to summon a dragon after being transformed. Upon learning that Medea couldn't summon a dragon in the modern world, his attitude towards her changed drastically, treating her with cold mockery and like a slave. Later, discovering Medea's powerful magical abilities, he became jealous and feared her revenge, so he contacted Kamar-Taj to kill her. Medea discovered this and used her noble phantasm to remove the command seal's restrictions, prematurely eliminating her master Atram. Just as she was about to disappear, she encountered Sorceress. Ryodaoji, after disappearing from the church, George went directly to the entrance of Ryodaoji, a famous temple in Fuyuki City. Sorceress and the 2 heroic spirits lived in this temple. Who goes there? George had barely stepped inside when a swordsman in a purple kimono, carrying a twig in his mouth, appeared before him. Sasaki Kajiro, George looked at the swordsman blocking his way, recognizing him as the assassin spirit summoned by the sorceress Medea using the gates of Ryodao Temple as a medium. However, this spirit seemed to have a weakness. It couldn't leave the temple grounds for a certain distance, or it would be forcibly pulled back. Master, or a heroic spirit, Sasaki Kajiro showed no surprise upon hearing George call his name. Anyone who could appear out of thin air in front of the temple gates was certainly no ordinary person. And anyone who could call his name so readily was either a master or a summoned heroic spirit. Never mind, it's not important. I'll take you down first. Spitting out the twig from his mouth, Sasaki Kajiro drew his longsword and unleashed his secret technique. Swallow return. 3 sword beams attacked George's vitals almost simultaneously. To have swordsmanship honed to this level is quite remarkable. Facing Sasaki Kajiro's sword strike, George was enveloped in golden light. Don't underestimate Sasaki Kajiro just because he's a swordsman. A swordsman summoned as a heroic spirit is certainly no ordinary swordsman. This sword strike with 3 beams of light wasn't just about speed, it had touched upon some kind of rule, reaching a level of skill bordering on the Dao. from a flash in the real world, then two completely overlapping flashes that disregarded the concepts of time and space, resulting in strikes from three directions. It was a multidimensional convoluted phenomenon that transcended speed, finesse, and feints. Theoretically, it was a guaranteed hit, no less powerful than the causality of a spearman. Unfortunately, his strike was aimed at George. Even if all three sword beams hit, they wouldn't break through his defenses. Withdraw. George ignored the attack and quickly slapped Sasaki Kojiro's forehead, a sealing technique rapidly spreading across his body, sealing him completely before casually tossing him into the small world. He entered Ryudoji Temple and went straight to the room where Kuzuki Sawachiro lived. It was late at night. A man and a woman were sharing a room. Although they were master and servant, they were both adults, and it was normal for things to get a little heated. Moreover, they had fallen in love at first sight. At this moment, Media and Sawachiro Kuzuki were conducting a specialized research on ventriloquism No. 69 when they suddenly heard an unfamiliar voice beside them. "Still eating? I'm taking you in." With almost no effort, George subdued the master and servant pair and brought them into his small world. Sawachiro Kuzuki was just an ordinary person, and Media, whose master was also an ordinary person, couldn't unleash her full power and needed to replenish her magical energy by absorbing the souls of ordinary people. Before leaving, George also took the entire Ryudoji Temple with him. Chapter 629 The Creator of the Holy Grail War. The Matau family mansion. Matau Sakura, accompanied by the Night Medusa, arrived at her grandfather Matau Zauken's room, her voice trembling with fear. "Brother, he's dead, dead." Zauken, leaning on his cane, looked surprised. Sakura then recounted all the information Medusa had provided to Zauken. After gaining temporary control of Medusa, Matau Shinji had mingled with his supervisor, Katamine Kairi, and even set up a soul-eating barrier within the school. Tonight, he and Gilgamesh were supposed to go to support Katamine Kairi, but they were instantly killed by George's headshot at the very beginning. With Shinji's death, Medusa naturally returned to her true master, Matau Sakura. As for what happened afterward, and who won and who lost, Medusa had no idea. What a waste. Just like his father, Zauken showed no sadness or grief at the death of the Matau family's only bloodline, as if the dead were merely insects. At this moment, he was considering the odds of winning the Fifth Holy Grail War. The participants in the Fourth Holy Grail War were too powerful, and after his second son, Matau Korea, was defeated, he chose to give up. But this time, he used the fragment of the Lesser Grail that King Arthur shattered in the Fourth Holy Grail War as a catalyst to create a crest, which he placed inside Sakura's body, transforming Sakura into an incomplete Lesser Grail. If Sakura could ultimately win, he could guide Angramanayu from the Greater Grail into Sakura's body. At that time, the crest worm he left inside Sakura could possess her body, thus indirectly achieving immortality. Now that Matau Shinji was dead, he felt that this was actually a good thing. At least everyone would think that the Matau family was out of the game, thus lowering the guard and allowing him to reap the benefits. Just like now, at the church, they must have already fought tooth and nail. He knew very well how strong Gilgamesh was, and with Kairi Katamine and the Lancers, they could definitely fight against the swordsmen, berserkers, and archers. Ideally, both sides would perish together, so he could complete his plan by only helping Sakura deal with the two from Ryudoji. In that case, you will continue to represent the family in the Holy Grail War, but Grandpa, I don't want to participate. Sakura's face showed a pleading expression. Participating in the Holy Grail War would end her peaceful life, and she might even find herself on the opposite side of Shiraui Miaya and her sister Rin Tasaka. However, upon hearing Sakura's plea, Zauken Matau's face turned cold. You have no right to refuse. Otherwise, I would kill Shiraui Miaya first, and then make you wish you were dead. Activating the crest worms implanted within Sakura's body, Sakura's body was immediately eroded, and she collapsed weakly to the ground. Don't worry, as long as you win the Holy Grail War, I will remove the crest worms from your body and let you live like a normal person. Shiraui Miaya will never know what you've been through all these years. You can marry him, have children, and live a happy life. The carrot and stick approach always works. Upon hearing Zauken Matau's promise, Sakura's eyes began to waver. She was willing to do anything to live happily ever after with Shiraui Miaya. Just as she was about to agree, a voice suddenly rang out in the room. Little girl, I actually have a better option. If you're willing to give me your command seals, I can not only remove the crest worms from your body, but also help you remove the fake holy grail that old man placed inside you. If needed, killing him for you is no problem either. The newcomer was none other than George, who had recruited both a mage and an assassin at Ryudaoji Temple. Who goes there, daring to trespass into the Matao family? Zhaoken Matao's expression changed drastically when a young man suddenly appeared behind Sakura. With a wave of his hand, a swarm of crest worms attacked George. George, however, opened his mouth and spat out more a ball of three-colored flames, incinerating all the flying crest worms to ashes. I am the master of the swordsman you were just discussing, and also the one who killed your grandson, so, Kaira Ikatamine lost. Zhaoken Matao narrowed his eyes. In his heart, he felt that Kaira Ikatamine was more likely to win in the church. Although it was 2 against 3 servants, and 1 against 3 masters, Kaira Ikatamine was, after all, the one who fought to the very end in the 4th Holy Grail War and almost won. Moreover, he was cunning and treacherous, and even he was very wary of him. As for Gilgamesh, his strength was abnormally high, even among servants. But he didn't expect that the one who won in the end would be this stranger in front of him with no information at all. That's right, you guessed correctly, but there is no reward. George didn't waste any words with Zhaoken Matao, but went straight forward to forcibly search his soul. He always felt that the head of the Matao family, whose body was made of insects, must be hiding some secret. Otherwise, he wouldn't have implanted a pseudo-holy grail in Sakura Matao's body. Sakura, kill him. Seeing George attack him, Zhaoken Matao immediately gave the order to Sakura, but found that Sakura and the cavalry Medusa were frozen in place, unable to move. You trespassed into the Matao family and maliciously attacked this old man. Aren't you afraid of the Church and the Mages Association's punishment? His expression changed drastically upon seeing Sakura and the cavalry subdued instantly. While his body completely transformed into an insect to dodge the attack, he threatened George. Without using a servant, he had easily subdued the powerful Sakura and Medusa, whose strength was almost fully restored thanks to Sakura's magical energy, solely through his own magic. Even in his prime, he would have found this difficult. Clearly, this unfamiliar young man was stronger than he was in his prime. He was definitely not someone he could handle now. Therefore, he could only intimidate him by mentioning the Church and the Mages Association. The Holy Grail War had its rules. As a swordsman's master, one could attack fellow competitors like Sakura and Medusa, but not without cause the head of the Matao family. Once discovered, he would face a collective hunt from the Church and the Mages Association. Freeze him. Seeing Matao Zhaoken trying to escape in his insect form, George raised his hand and cast an ice spell, freezing him in midair. He didn't care about the Church and the Mages Association. Besides, as long as he killed Matao Zhaoken, no one would report him, and the Church and the Mages Association wouldn't have the time to investigate. Kaira Ikatamine's actions were far more serious, yet they were still easily overlooked. Let me see what's going on with you. By freezing Matao Zhaoken, George was reading his memories. After a long while, he withdrew his hand in surprise. I didn't expect you to be the first head of the Matao family, one of the main creators of the Holy Grail War. Chapter 630 The Third Magic, The Heaven's Cup. Zhaoken Matao, whose real name was Makere Zorjan, was a great magician with lofty ambitions 500 years ago. His greatest wish was to save humanity. He believed that humanity's suffering stemmed from the limitations of the human body due to its material constraints, and that the only way to save humanity was to unleash a large-scale third magic, allowing humanity to collectively ascend. Therefore, he began researching how to bring humanity into the vortex of the root on a large scale. Through his efforts, he discovered a recurring phenomenon in world history. Whenever a major catastrophe struck, heroes from human history would be resurrected in a special way to save the world. And the number of heroes was always 7. Later, through in-depth research, he finally understood its underlying mechanism. In this world, there exists a root, 2 restraining forces, and 5 great magics. The root is naturally the vortex of the root, the starting point of everything. The 2 restraining forces are Gaia, representing the consciousness of the entire planet, and Alaya, representing the consciousness of primates, which can be considered the collective consciousness of all humanity. The 5 great magics are 5 types of magic that can lead to the vortex of the root. The first magic, the oldest magic, is the negation of nothingness, the magic of creation. It's creation from nothing, essentially the magic of creating the world. The second magic, parallel world operation, is a magic that allows free travel and interference in various parallel universes. The third magic, Heaven's Cup, is the magic of soul materialization, granting immortality and achieving the materialization of the soul. The fourth magic, Unknown, has no current records, only that the corresponding mage seems to still exist. The fifth magic, Time Travel and Destruction, allows free travel to the past and future, even reversing time to resurrect the dead. It can also destroy any object in the world. According to the rules of the world, only one inheritor of each of these 5 magics can exist at any given time. Therefore, as long as the previous mage is alive, others cannot learn or use these 5 magics. The principle behind the hero's resurrection is that Elia, the collective consciousness of humanity, created the throne of heroes, an ethereal construct. Then, it perfectly imitated a hero based on the realm records. Thus, in the present world, it appears as if the hero has been resurrected. Having discovered this principle, Kamar-Taj found the workshop of the third sorcerer and Justiza, the patriarch of the Ainsburn family. The two hit it off immediately and began artificially mimicking this phenomenon, thus creating the prototype of the Holy Grail War. Unfortunately, Justiza was merely a student of the third sorcerer, a homunculus created based on his missing teacher. While he could barely cast the third sorcerer magic, it took him several years to unleash it, a far cry from the third sorcerer's instantaneous power. Therefore, Kamar-Taj went to Japan, changed his name to Awaken, and sought out the Tosaka family, who possessed an exceptionally large spiritual vein. Using the promise of access to the route through the Holy Grail War as bait, he recruited the Tosaka family, providing Justiza with the spiritual power of the vein to create the Greater Grail. Then, by promising a wish upon victory in the Holy Grail War, he tricked 7 mages into participating in the war ritual. In the first Holy Grail War, lacking command seals, the summoned servants completely ignored their masters, resulting in a chaotic battle where the Holy Grail was destroyed, leading to Kamar-Taj's defeat. To initiate the Second Holy Grail War, 60 years must pass. Kamar-Taj, worried about his lifespan, transformed himself into a crest worm to extend it. However, he didn't expect that the transformation would affect him, gradually eroding his mind, causing him to forget his original intentions and lose his humanity. Now, only the obsession of immortality remains in his heart. The 5 great magics, it seems I can go to the clock tower after this is over. Kamar-Taj, with his 500-year-old memories, not only helped George understand the fundamental principles of the Holy Grail War and the details of the 5 Holy Grail Wars, but also provided a more detailed understanding of the magic of this world. He not only wants to go to the root, but before that, he also wants to learn the 5 great magics. The first magic, creation, is exactly what he does every day to perfect his own little world. Perhaps learning the first magic will immediately complete his little world. The second magic, parallel world operation, allows him to freely travel between parallel worlds, and this magic will also be very useful to him. Currently, when he travels to various parallel universes in Marvel, he still needs to rely on the power of Vishanti's special magic and must determine the coordinates in advance. If he learns the second magic, he can freely travel between parallel universes without any restrictions. Perhaps after future improvements and refinements, he can even use it to travel between the worlds where his clones reside. The third magic, Heaven's Grail, is something he's already figured out about the Holy Grail system. Given his current magical level, he's likely to master it as well. He doesn't know what the fourth magic is, but since it's at the same level, it's probably not bad. The fifth magic involves time. Learning it will greatly enhance his time magic and the power of his destructive magic. Snap! George released his control over Matau, Sakura and Medusa. At the same time, he transmitted some of Kamar-Taj's memories of taking over Sakura's body. You already know the truth. The conditions I gave you still stand. Make your choice. I agree. Almost without hesitation, Matau Sakura gave her answer. She didn't care about magic, the Holy Grail War, or the Matau family's honor. All she cared about was Imaya Shirao. She just wanted to be an ordinary girl and build a happy family. Before the age of 5, she was an innocent little girl with a happy family and a blissful life. But after she was adopted into the Matau family by her father at the age of 5, all her happiness shattered. Every day, she was placed in a burrow filled with crest worms, a living hell, desperately calling out to her parents, but no one answered. She finally learned all the family's magic and found her own white moonlight, only to have her body violated by her non-blood-related brother. If it weren't for her kind nature, she would have long since turned to the dark side. Let's begin then. Don't worry, I won't tell Maya Shirao about your past. George opened his mouth and unleashed a burst of dragon fire, burning Matao Zhaokan to ashes. Then he reached out and sucked the crest worms and the fake holy grail from Matao Sakura's body. After doing all this, he transferred the command seals of Night Medusa to himself. Through Matao Zhaokan's memories, he knew that Matao Sakura was also a pitiful child. But now that he had killed Matao Zhaokan and Matao Shinji, Matao Sakura was the sole heir of the Matao family, inheriting all the wealth, and no one would know her past anymore. Their future will likely be bright. Chapter 631 Sealing the Holy Grail. After completing the deal with Matao Sakura, George teleported back to the church. There, Shiraoi Miaya and Rin Tosaka had already dealt with the orphans and resolved the issue with Kairi Ikatamine. Rin Tosaka wasn't a normal high school student. As the heir to the Tosaka family, she had been fully prepared mentally before participating in the Holy Grail War. Killing, especially killing her father's killer, was something she wouldn't hesitate to do. Don't be sad, you'll have a chance to meet again. Since the terms had been agreed upon, George didn't stand on ceremony and transferred all of Rin Tosaka and Ilia's command seals to himself. Rin Tosaka was fine. She had only summoned her servant a day ago and hadn't developed any emotional connection, so she didn't care about Shiraoi Miya's departure. Ilia, however, was quite heartbroken because she had summoned Heracles long ago, and the two were like father and daughter. So, while transferring the command seals, George offered her a word of comfort. And this comfort wasn't a lie. His original plan was to first study the noble phantasms of the 8 heroic spirits, then summon the Holy Grail to purify the black mud within, and finally use the 8 heroic spirits to open the entrance to the root and enter the vortex of root. However, after reviewing Zhaokan Matao's memories and gaining a better understanding of the third magic and the heavens feel, he realized it would be extremely difficult. The vortex of root symbolizes the origin of the world, and any attempt to sneak in would be blocked by 2 major restraining forces. Therefore, even if the Holy Grail had successfully passed through in the past without being corrupted, it would still be impossible to sneak back to the throne of heroes and enter the vortex of root with the heroic spirits. The hole had been drilled, but only if one could withstand the resistance of the 2 major restraining forces. Perhaps waiting for him on the other side of the hole would be all the heroic spirits of the throne of heroes. Although George considered himself powerful, he hadn't tried and couldn't guarantee he could overcome the resistance of the 2 major restraining forces. Therefore, he decided not to rush to purify the Holy Grail. He would purify it after he had thoroughly studied it, especially after learning the 5 major magics, and then confront the 2 major restraining forces to enter the vortex of root. Moreover, according to his plan, even after completing the ritual, these heroic spirits wouldn't necessarily be unable to remain. Once the hole was drilled, he could simply kick them back upon entering, allowing them to continue living in the mortal realm. Gilgamesh could use the black mud to reshape his body and live in the mortal world. Wasn't he stronger than the black mud? Having mastered the Holy Grail and understood its laws, it wasn't impossible for him to completely resurrect these individuals in the mortal world. With the 8 command seals fused into one, controlling all the servants, George kept his promise and began helping Ilia retrieve the Holy Grail and reshape her body. The entire process wasn't difficult. He first ripped out Ilia's small heart, then used his red hand to regenerate a new one. Simultaneously, he modified Ilia's magic circuits, repairing the hidden ailments and injuries caused by the modifications. It was all done in less than 10 minutes. Perfect, we can fuse them into one. Having healed Ilia, George took out the pseudo-Holy Grail extracted from Matao Sakura's body, placed Ilia's heart inside, and directly combined the 2 into a new Holy Grail. The creation of the Holy Grail wasn't particularly difficult. Its primary purpose was to house the souls of heroic spirits slain in the Holy Grail War. It was primarily made by the Eansburn family. Initially, it was a separate, smaller Holy Grail, but due to its accidental destruction before the previous Holy Grail Wars ended, it was placed within an artificial human. Given the knowledge he gained from Zhaokan Matao and his own magical abilities, creating a new one immediately would likely be difficult. However, combining the 2 and directly manifesting it wasn't challenging. Seal. As he combined the 2 into the true Holy Grail, George immediately cast a sealing jutsu to seal it. If he didn't seal it now, the completed Holy Grail would connect to the Great Grail beneath Fuyuki City, allowing the cursed power of the black mud to seep out. He wasn't in a hurry to purify the curse and end the Holy Grail War, so he sealed it first. Alright, things are over. May we meet again someday. Having achieved his goal, George didn't linger. After saying goodbye, he disappeared with the 8 heroic spirits. Seeing George and the heroic spirits disappear, Shirawimiya, Rin Tosaka, and Ilya were all filled with a mix of emotions, including mixed feelings, and a sense of reflection. Shirawimiya was struck by how these few hours had been more eventful than the past decade or so. From witnessing heroic spirits fight, to being killed, resurrected, summoning them, giving them up, watching the battle unfold, to finally seeing things calm down. Rin Tosaka was moved by how many years she had prepared for the Holy Grail War, only to have it end so easily. However, she was glad she had avenged her father, fulfilling a wish. She also marveled at the existence of such a powerful mage as George, realizing how far she still fell short in magical abilities. Ilya, besides being moved by the night's events, also felt a sense of confusion. With the Holy Grail War ending in this way, the clan leader, according to regulations, would close the entire homunculus factory, putting all the homunculi into a standby state. This meant she would gain her freedom and no longer need to return to the Eansburn family to continue living the life of a homunculus. Although she had gained freedom, she was unsure what to do next. "What are your plans now?" On the way home from the church, Shirawimiya asked first. Rin Tosaka looked at the stars. Compared to Mr. George, I feel so insignificant, so I plan to go to the clock tower in England to study magic and restore the reputation of our Tosaka family. Her father's murder was avenged, and the Holy Grail War was over. The once renowned Tosaka family was now reduced to a single person. Having witnessed her own weakness, she didn't intend to continue wasting her time in a regular school and planned to go to a real magic academy after this semester ended. "You also have magical talent. I can introduce you if you want to go." "Never mind, I think my life is fine as it is." Shirawimiya shook his head, thinking of Sakura Matao and Taiga Fujimura. He could see from today that the world of magicians was extremely dangerous. With his meager magical abilities, it was best not to get involved. "Ilya, what about you?" "I don't know. I can't go back to my family. So I don't know where to go." Ilya lowered her head. Seeing this, Shirawimiya immediately extended an invitation. "Why don't you come to my house? It was originally bought by my father, so you should have a share. I can tell you some things about my father." "My father's place." Ilya's mind flashed back to the image of her father playing with her in the snow, and she nodded firmly. Chapter 632 Attack on Angbin. A month later, in the small world. "I've almost finished researching everyone else's noble phantasms, now it's just yours. I believe that since you were summoned as a heroic spirit, you must have your own unique noble phantasm, not just some random bow and sword," George said, looking at the red-clad Imiya standing opposite him. In a month, with his magical and alchemical skills, he had almost finished researching everything from the Lancer's causality-infused, guaranteed hit spear to the Berserker's resurrection noble phantasm. With a little more time and the right materials, he could even slowly recreate them himself. He had even made considerable progress with Gilgamesh's Ea. He had also thoroughly reviewed all the second and third-rate noble phantasms in the treasury. In fact, it was precisely because of the countless noble phantasms in Gilgamesh's treasury that he had a wealth of research samples, greatly improving his research efficiency. The only one he hadn't fully researched yet was the red-clad Imiya's noble phantasm. While the noble phantasm he presented was good, it felt somewhat lacking. It wasn't enough to be converted into one of the 7 great heroic spirits. "I really don't have a noble phantasm, or rather, I don't have one at all." The crimson Imiya plopped down on the bench and explained, "The noble phantasms I researched for you were all copied using the Reality Marble Unlimited Blade Works. The main reason I became a heroic spirit is because of this magic." Normally, given his personality, he wouldn't reveal his true nature to George. He hadn't even told Rin Tosaka. But after a month together, he found George to be a very trustworthy person. As long as the heroic spirits cooperated with the research, George provided them with good food and drink. Once the research was complete, they could freely leave this world to find their former masters in the human world, or enjoy life there. More importantly, it was pointless for him to refuse. George was not only bound by command seals, but could also forcibly invade his mind to read his memories. So, after much thought, he decided to tell the truth. Unlimited Blade Works, copying noble phantasms, That's interesting. George immediately became interested. He had studied the noble phantasms the Crimson Email had provided and couldn't tell they were copies. He himself knew the copying spell, but while it could copy ordinary items, it couldn't copy magical artifacts or artifacts. I am the bone of the sword I wield. This body is the bone of the sword. Steel is my body, and fire is my blood. My blood flows like black iron. My heart is as fragile as glass. Unlimited blade works. Without further ado, red-clad Email chanted the incantation, activating his reality marble. George didn't resist and was sucked into the unlimited blade works reality marble. It was a red wasteland filled with thousands of swords, flames leaping on the distant horizon, and giant, swirling gears filing the dark sky. Any noble phantasm I've seen can materialize in this world, but it will be one level lower. However, I can't materialize a noble phantasm of Gilgamesh's Aya. Not bad. Listening to red-clad Email explain the principles, advantages, and disadvantages of his unlimited blade works magic, and exploring the reality marble with his mental power, George nodded. For him, this was a pretty good spell. With this magic, his clones and other worlds could quickly materialize even without forging each noble phantasm in that world individually. As for lowering the level, that was because Shirao Email's strength wasn't sufficient. With his power, he could perfectly replicate it with just a slight modification to the magic. Even the Aya sword wouldn't be a problem. And it wasn't just weapons, any noble phantasm should be no issue. In the elven city of Middle-earth, George gently lifted the still sleeping Othine from his body and went to the window. He drew back the curtains, letting bright sunlight stream into the room, and his gaze fell upon the towering mountain in the distance. It's about time to destroy Angbin. Since the last great battle, Morgoth had been quiet, withdrawing all his forces to Angbin and entering a state of full defense. Just like the 350 years of peace after the War of Glory. He estimated that Morgoth was beginning to regroup, waiting for the next counterattack. But this time was different. He wouldn't be as naive as the elves, merely wanting to trap Morgoth for temporary peace. His goal was to directly annihilate Morgoth, devour his body and soul to enhance his own power, seize the 3 Silmarils, and then head to Valinor. He wasn't very confident before, but now, having not only devoured the power of the Phoenix and the power of Chaos, but also the Black Dragon, his strength had increased dramatically. Although he hadn't yet broken through to the single universe level, he wasn't far off. He believed that once he devoured Morgoth, his individual strength would at least reach the single universe level. Then, he could go to Valinor to learn the various laws of creation from the gods, and the perfection of his smaller world would be nearly complete. Therefore, there was no time to lose. While Morgoth hadn't yet created anything new and his orc army hadn't recovered, he had to act. His mental power covered the entire elven city, and George transmitted a message to Galadriel, who was training soldiers outside the city. The time to annihilate Angbin has come. Notify all races to come to the academy for a meeting. After the last Great War, George had discussed the plan to annihilate Angbin and completely eradicate Morgoth with the 3 races. Morgoth, the leader of the 3 races, had long been confident that George had a way to dispel the poisonous fog and darkness of Angbin. Coupled with their recent victories in the Great War, their confidence soared. Therefore, during this time, the 3 races had been preparing for war, mass-producing various magical weapons according to George's improved alchemy techniques. They awaited only George's command to assemble their armies, utterly destroy Angbin, and kill Morgoth. Ha ha ha, the war has finally begun. After I sever Morgoth's head, you will all call me your majesty. Receiving George's telepathic message, Galadriel brandished her elven longsword, addressing the elven soldiers below with triumphant spirit. The soldiers below, seemingly accustomed to their princess's childish antics, applauded. Taking out a crystal ball specially made by George, Galadriel vanished from her spot. Her first stop was, of course, the elven city of Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor. Her second stop was the Forest of the Grey Elf Kings, and her third stop was the Blue Mountain Dwarves. The final battle took place in Minas Tirith, the first newly built royal city of mankind. A name given by George. It was actually a lazy choice, as Minas Tirith would become the future capital of Gondor, the human kingdom of Middle-earth. 3 days later, outside Angbin, soldiers of all 3 races had assembled, and their kings had also arrived. Leading them, naturally, was George, the most powerful mage. Chapter 633 The Hobbit. Huh? Who are those people? Before the attack, George noticed an additional force of small humans in the human army. and a thought struck him. Bregulas, the first king of the humans, explained, they are halflings who recently migrated from the east. Don't let their small size and lack of strength fool you, they have keen eyesight and exceptional hearing. They run incredibly fast and walk silently, making them natural scouts, halflings, so they really are hobbits. After hearing Bregulas's explanation, George was certain that these tiny creatures, only a meter tall, were the future protagonists of Middle-earth. Morgoth, dare you come out and fight me one-on-one? Cowardly Morgoth, come out and die. Turning his amplification spell to its maximum, George began shouting insults at Angband. It wasn't that he was rude, but if he could provoke Morgoth into coming out of Angband, the base he had built over so many years, their chances of victory would at least double. Morgoth's power is largely eroding the entire world, with Angband being the area where his influence is strongest. Years of development have created various protective measures in addition to the poisonous fog and dark power. Therefore, Morgoth and the orcs will be significantly stronger in Angband, while humans, elves, and dwarves entering will inevitably suffer many negative consequences. Mere humans, daring to challenge me before the king. Come in if you dare. A moment later, a voice no less powerful than George's echoed from within Angband. The voice was calm, showing no sign of losing its composure despite George's words. It seems strength will prevail. George wasn't particularly surprised. Morgoth wasn't a mindless wretch. Having manipulated the older elves, bewitched the gods, and escaped imprisonment, he wouldn't be so easily provoked. But there was no harm in trying. Meanwhile, Morgoth within Angband was also channeling his power into the earth, observing the situation outside. He wasn't afraid of humans, elves, or dwarves, even though the leading human mage was indeed very powerful. But as long as he stays inside Angband, and with all the defenses he's built up over the years, he can definitely hold out. His only worry is whether the gods are involved in this great battle. If they are, then he'll have to consider abandoning Angband and fleeing, finding a place to hide. Having learned from his last experience, if he's caught again, escape will be nearly impossible. Fortunately, after searching, he didn't find any divine power, only the combined forces of humans, elves, and dwarves. Good, if you dare attack, I'll annihilate you all and transform you into orcs. That way, I won't have to wait any longer. I can directly counterattack and rule the entire continent. Currently, Angband is besieged by the elite forces of all three races, and almost all their leaders are present. If he can wipe them out in one fell swoop, then Middle-earth will have no power left to resist him. However, under normal circumstances, the three races aren't that foolish to fight the orc army and him inside Angband. They've probably won several major battles and become arrogant. Looking at it this way, he felt that the previous defeats might not have been such a bad thing after all. Otherwise, the leaders of the three races wouldn't have been foolish enough to attack his stronghold and risk their lives. You think you've won by killing some of my men? Wait 300 to 500 years. Until you lower your guard, and my orc army will raise your cities and slaughter your descendants. Just wait, I have plenty of time to fight you slowly. Fearing that the allied forces of the three races wouldn't dare to enter, Morgoth deliberately uttered some threatening words. Don't worry, he'll come out. Hearing Morgoth's threats, the kings of the three races were instantly enraged and were about to start the battle, but George stopped them. Going inside to fight Morgoth was out of the question. Since the provocation hadn't worked and Morgoth wasn't falling for it, they would have to use force to force him out. In fact, forcing Morgoth out of Angband had never been a difficult task for him. As long as he kept casting spells, he could easily blast the entire Angband to pieces. The poisonous fog, dark magic, and traps would all be obliterated. He hadn't done this before because he wasn't confident he could defeat Morgoth if he truly forced him out. Just poisonous fog, George transformed into a gigantic black dragon. Since swallowing a black dragon, his body had leaned towards its form, only stronger and more imposing. He wasn't limited to using only devouring magic like a black dragon, he could also use magic of other elements. Dragon Slayer magic, roar of the fire dragon. With a roar, even more powerful flames erupted like a waterfall, endlessly filling the sky above Angband. Soon, the poisonous fog was completely reduced to nothingness by the flames. His flames were no longer just the previous three colored flames, they now included the Samadhi true fire of this huge family, capable of burning the soul, as well as different types of flames collected from various worlds. So, let alone the mere poisonous fog, even the dark power shrouded by Morgoth beneath it was burned away. Some orcs above the fortress were even purified, body and soul, the moment they came into contact with the flames. What terrifying flames! Deep beneath Angbin, Morgoth felt his spreading dark power being gradually eroded by the flames, and he was shocked to the point of standing up from his throne. He had never encountered such terrifying flames. Even the flames of the Fire Lord and the fire dragons he had created were far inferior in power to the flames spewed by the Black Dragon. It was as if the power of the flames had transcended the laws of this world. Trying to burn Angbin down with flames? Dream on. Powerful dark power erupted from within him, filling the entire fortress and forcefully blocking the flames. He was also a master of fire, knowing how to maximize his resistance to fire attacks. Moreover, Angbin had been roasted in his demonic fire for many years. As expected of the strongest valor, even with most of their power eroding the earth, they still have so much dark energy to envelop the entire fortress. Seeing that the poisonous mist had dissipated, but Morgoth's dark power was gradually isolating the flames, George thought to himself, though he didn't stop breathing fire. However, while breathing fire, he lowered his altitude, his dragon claws gripping the summit of Angbin, and began activating the primal flow and the Black Dragon's devouring magic to nullify all the dark power. Morgoth's dark power was indeed formidable, but as long as it was energy and didn't involve laws, it couldn't resist the primal flow and devouring magic. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 634 The Final Battle with Morgoth. The dark power receded, and the flames surged and spread once more, burning into the tunnels leading underground. But that wasn't all. A series of magic circles above his head lit up again, and 500 enormous meteors simultaneously rained down on Angbin. God's star collapse, 500 barrages, boom, 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 boom. A series of deafening sounds rang out, and the three races' armies watching from the periphery felt the earth shake and tear apart. When they regained their footing, they found that the entire Angbin mountain had vanished, leaving only a gigantic, bottomless abyss leading deep into the earth. Super magic, fairy radiance, 500 barrages. Having extinguished the flames, George, now back above the allied forces, had hundreds of magic circles light up above his head once more. Beams of light, as thick as the bottomless abyss, crashed in one after another. The power of light was extremely effective against orcs and Morgoth. Therefore, without the Angbin fortress to block their path, the most efficient magic was light-based super magic focused on annihilation. His magic power was already strong, his mana regeneration was fast, and he had devouring magic and 6 treasures of the immortal thief, allowing him to continuously unleash the radiance of fairies. Too brutal, the surrounding armies of the three races watched the vanishing Angbin mountain, watching the beams of light relentlessly bombard Morgoth's lair. The screams that had been lingering gradually faded away. They all let out the same exclamation. To be honest, at this moment, they all had a misconception. That attacking Angbin and defeating Morgoth seemed to require only George alone. They didn't need to do anything. It felt like their massive mobilization, their long preparations, and their do-or-die determination to besiege Angbin were all misplaced. From beginning to end, they were just supporting characters, mere spectators. George alone was enough to be the protagonist. If this were true, would it be a bad thing? Of course not. For everyone, it was a good thing. Because no matter the type of war, whether it's defending one's homeland or expanding territory, what may seem like passionate and exciting battles are, in reality, brutal. If the protagonists this time are the armies of the three races, even if they ultimately win, most of the warriors from all three races will perish. Among these fallen warriors are fathers, sons, husbands, and some who hold all three identities. Some say that war ends with a political bureau shaking hands in reconciliation, officers rising through the ranks, and merchants making a fortune, leaving only broken families and crippled veterans. While not entirely applicable to wars in this world, the last point still holds true. Therefore, if being a spectator could end the war, I believe 99% of people would be very willing, and their families would be even more so. What they don't know is that when George decided to attack Morgoth, he was already confident that he could handle the entire Angbin single-handedly. For him, placing his hopes on others was unreliable. Therefore, in this battle, the armies of the three races were merely his backup plan, just in case. If nothing unexpected happens, he alone can annihilate the entire Angbin and deal with the Morgoth. In case of unforeseen circumstances, the combined forces of the three races could provide some assistance. However, it seems there shouldn't be much of a problem for now. After all, with this series of actions, it's estimated that besides Morgoth, few orcs in the crypt will survive. You lowly human, you've gone too far. As the 365th pillar of light crashed down, Morgoth's suppressed rage finally echoed from the depths of the crypt. Simultaneously, a figure clad in black magic armor and wielding a magic sword flew out of the crypt. He hadn't originally planned to come out, even though the Angbin mountain had been shattered and the orc army in the crypt had all been purified by the power of light. Because most of his power was being used to corrupt the continent, once he left the crypt, his strength would be limited, and he might not be able to defeat the human above. Moreover, there was the combined forces of the three races present, not just that human alone. He had initially underestimated that human, never expecting that a mere human's magic would be so powerful, capable of shattering the entire Angbin. His plan was to endure it. Either his opponent would bring a large army to the depths of the crypts for a decisive battle, where he could unleash his full power and annihilate them, or they would give up and establish a base around Angbin, just like before, only with a closer defensive line. In that case, he could continue to accumulate strength deep within the crypts, slowly creating new soldiers. Human lifespans were limited. In 200 or 300 years, the human mage would be dead, and he would still have the opportunity to lead a newly created army to counterattack and conquer the continent again. It was just that having his stronghold constantly bombarded with magic was somewhat humiliating and frustrating for the strongest valor. But he didn't particularly care about that. Compared to being captured and imprisoned in Valinor, it was nothing. What he cared about was the outcome, about ultimately ruling Middle-earth and making it his world. At that point, even Iluvatar wouldn't be afraid, and the valor of Manwë would be nothing more than clowns in his eyes. However, the reality was somewhat beyond his expectations. The opponent unleashed that incredibly powerful light magic not just 5 or 10 times, but a full 300 times, with no sign of stopping. Even if he could withdraw some of the dark power that was eroding the continent to build a defense, he couldn't withstand such relentless bombardment. Once his power was exhausted, things would become truly troublesome. So, after a struggle in his mind, he decided to temporarily withdraw all the dark power eroding Middle-earth and quickly eliminate the human mage. Staying here as a sitting duck, being drained of power, and then being surrounded and attacked by the human mage and the three-race army, would likely leave him with no chance of escape. It would be better to quickly eliminate the human mage, wipe out the three-race alliance, and then immediately return to replenish his power on the earth. This would significantly shrink the eroded land and prolong the time it took to erode the entire Middle-earth, but at least it would resolve the crisis. Moreover, the corpses of the human mage and the three-race alliance could be used to corrupt them with his dark power, transforming them into new warriors for his use. In less than a century, a new army will emerge from the crypt and annihilate the remaining three races outside. Therefore, he emerged, bringing with him all his power. Dodging the radiant attacks of the fairies, transforming into a towering giant, and striking directly at George's dragon head with his sword. Chapter 635 The Opportunity for Victory. Unfortunately, imagination is beautiful, but reality is cruel. Just as Morgoth, brimming with immense dark power, was about to slay George with his demon sword, George's dragon face was filled with joy. After all this time, I finally forced you out. With a powerful clasp of his claws, he performed a feat of catching a blade with bare hands, and before Morgoth could even exert any force, George activated his devouring magic in primal flow. Morgoth felt a significant amount of the dark power attached to his demon sword dissipate. Taking advantage of Morgoth's momentary lapse in concentration, George opened the entrance to his miniature world and swallowed Morgoth whole. With Morgoth's strength, escaping would have been quite difficult if he truly wanted to. But once inside George's miniature world, escape would be much more difficult. What's going on? Where am I? Morgoth immediately sensed something was wrong upon entering George's miniature world. Iluvatar created the universe with his music, and Morgoth was one of the participants, so he was naturally very familiar with the laws of Middle-earth. This wasn't Middle-earth, it was a world George had cobbled together, combining the laws of various worlds, and was bound to be very different. World Seal, Chains of Heaven. Before Morgoth could even try to use his demon sword to cut through space and escape this small world, George had already entered and launched his attack. Countless golden chains, inscribed with runes, appeared from all directions, instantly binding Morgoth tightly. This was a modified world version of Gilgamesh's noble phantasm, Chains of Heaven. Chains of Heaven were inherently effective against gods, and with the sealing techniques of various worlds imprinted on them, their effect was amplified several times over. My power is suppressed, bound by the Chains of Heaven. Morgoth immediately sensed his strength was suppressed, only able to unleash less than half its power, and he was greatly alarmed. Demon sword, slash, with a thought, he dared not hesitate any longer, pouring most of his power into his demon sword. He didn't sever the chains, nor did he attack George, who had just entered. Instead, he continued slashing at the space before him. He was severely suppressed in this alternate dimension and needed to leave to return to Middle-earth to continue the fight. But George wouldn't let Morgoth escape. The small world wasn't yet complete. With Morgoth's power, this strike could truly cleave his world. Excalibur, George used unlimited blade works to copy Artoria's noble phantasm, a smirk playing on his lips, and unleashed the full power of Excalibur towards Morgoth. A diversionary tactic, he ignored the magic sword and attacked Morgoth directly. Morgoth was still bound by the Chains of Heaven. He couldn't dodge this attack. He would either withdraw the magic sword to parry or take the blow head-on. Actually, using AI at this moment would be more effective, more powerful, and potentially a one-hit kill. However, he hadn't yet deciphered AI and needed more time to copy it. However, Excalibur was no slouch either. Being of the light element, it was effective against Morgoth, and its power far surpassed that of Artoria's. Damn it! Sensing the force of George's sword strike, Morgoth's expression changed drastically again, and he hurriedly withdrew his sword in defense. Taking the blow head-on wouldn't kill him, but he would certainly be severely injured. If the injury was too severe, he wouldn't be able to break free of his chains, let alone escape this space. Even if he did manage to break free, his injuries would make him no match for the terrifying human mage before him, not to mention the three race alliance eyeing him with predatory intent. Is this the potential of humanity? He had always looked down on humans. Oliver had created 2 children, an elf and a human. He had witnessed the power of the elves, especially the Vanya elves, who were blessed by the Tree of Life. Some of their experts were approaching the strength of the valor. But humans were different. From his observation, the human race was truly weak, with short lifespans, even weaker than the dwarves created by Ali. Today, he realized his mistake. The power of this human before him was no less than his own at his peak. I am the master of Arda's destiny, the ruler of heaven and earth. How could I possibly lose to a mere human like you? The powerful light of the exorcised sword was overwhelming Morgoth, making him feel the danger of death for the first time. Therefore, he held back, unleashing all his divine power. His body rapidly expanded, transforming into a giant, forcefully shattering the chains of heaven. He swung his massive demonic sword, unleashing a torrent of dark power that neutralized the giant light sword unleashed by the exorcised sword. He realized that if he couldn't kill this human today, he would likely be unable to escape the space he had created. Then come on, George, unwilling to be outdone, transformed into his full dragon form and charged into melee combat. Simultaneously, he controlled the laws of the world to suppress Morgoth. Elemental magic, wind, rain, thunder, lightning, rained down relentlessly, striking Morgoth. Time-stopping, spatial manipulation, the influence of magic based on emotions and desires, light-based super magic, and the suppression of mental abilities were all constantly affecting Morgoth, preventing him from unleashing his full power. These alone aren't enough to kill me. If this space continues like this, it might not hold up. Human, cooperate with me. With your strength, if you pledge allegiance to me, we can surely become the masters of Middle-earth. Then, half the world will be yours, and you can have whatever you want. As a Valor who participated in the creation of the world, Morgoth's power was undeniable. He possessed considerable resistance to almost every type of magic. However, George's magic was too powerful and varied. Even if each type only had a slight effect on him, the cumulative effect was still unbearable. Moreover, there was the dangerous close-quarters combat, the suppression of the world's laws, and the chains of heaven constantly lurking nearby after recovering, ready to bind him at the slightest opening. As time went on, he felt he might truly perish here, so he began to use his powerful mental strength to bewitch George. He was a master in this regard, a true master among masters. Gothmog, Sauron, and even those Balrogs were all mere corrupted by him. Trying to bewitch me? You're asking for death, Sensing the intrusion of Morgoth's spiritual power, George's lips curled into a smile, knowing the opportunity to win this battle had finally arrived. Spiritual unity, the spiritual power of his main body and his otherworld avatars instantly concentrated on this avatar. Not only forcibly dispelling Morgoth's bewitching influence but also invading its soul, causing its body to involuntarily pause. Chapter 636 Iluvatar's Arrival. Excalibur, 10,000 Swords Unleashed. As Morgoth's mind was reverse invaded, his body momentarily stunned, 10,000 Excalibur swords instantly appeared in the sky. From the moment he entered this small world, he had been secretly using the world's laws to rapidly replicate Excalibur swords, then concealing them. He had already replicated 10,000 Excalibur swords. In principle, unlimited blade works can only replicate one noble phantasm at a time. Only when the replicated noble phantasm is destroyed can it be replicated again. But this was his world, and naturally, it had to follow his rules. According to the laws he currently understood, he could replicate 10,000 Excalibur swords simultaneously under his maximum potential. This was the advantage of possessing his own world. It wasn't a complete world yet. If it were, the number could be many times greater. No, having barely expelled George's invading mental power, before he could even react, Morgoth was simultaneously struck by 10,000 giant lightsabers. The powerful light tore through Morgoth's body, his physical form began to crumble, and his power began to dissipate. He never imagined that his meticulously planned schemes of so many years would fail not at the hands of the gods, but instead at the hands of a mere human, no, a dragon. I'm not reconciled. 6 Treasures of the Immortal Thief. Seeing Morgoth's body begin to crumble, George immediately stepped forward, snatched the 3 silmarils from Morgoth's head, and began activating the 6 Treasures of the Immortal Thief to devour Morgoth's body. Powerful energy flowed continuously into his body, and his strength began to rapidly increase. However, just as he finished devouring Morgoth's body, feeling he was about to reach his peak, just devouring Morgoth's most important soul would allow him to break through, an unexpected event occurred. "Child, could you spare his soul for my sake?" A gentle voice suddenly entered his ears. Before he could react, he discovered that a faceless figure of light had appeared beside Morgoth's soul. To be able to enter my world silently, could it be? Looking at the suddenly appearing figure, George's pupils constricted, and a guess formed in his mind. His little world, though still imperfect, wasn't one that just anyone could force their way in. Even the Valor, on par with the Morgoth, couldn't force their way in from the outside unless they joined forces. Crucially, he hadn't noticed it all. In Middle-earth, only the creator of this world, Iluvatar, could do that. Iluvatar, the omniscient and omnipotent creator, the father of all things. The Valor and Matter were merely products of his split will. "Since you've spoken, then of course there's no problem." George reverted to human form and agreed without hesitation. He had no choice but to agree. He was under someone else's roof and had to bow his head. His strength was inferior, so there was nothing he could say. He wasn't some hot-blooded youth. He had to be rational when necessary. According to his calculations, if a will could split into gods and create a world like Middle-earth, then Iluvatar, even if not a multiverse-level being, was at least a peak single-universe-level being. Currently, he's at most at the peak of the Heavenly Father level, especially considering his imperfect little world and various abilities. In actual combat, he might be able to handle those newly entered single-universe-level opponents. But he's definitely not on the same level as Iluvatar. Iluvatar enters his little world without him even noticing. That's the difference. Even if he forcibly swallowed Morgoth's soul to advance to the single-universe level, he still wouldn't be a match for Iluvatar. The newly entered single-universe level and the peak of the single-universe level are completely different. The stronger one is, the more obvious the difference within the same level becomes. For example, the difference between the newly entered Heavenly Father level and the peak of the Heavenly Father level is definitely not as great as the difference between the newly entered single-universe level and the peak of the single-universe level. It's even less significant than the difference between the newly entered multiverse level and the peak of the multiverse level. If one has their own world, the difference might be even more pronounced. There are many kinds of worlds. Some are just a planet, a continent, with perhaps some meteorites outside, and some intelligent life living on the planet. Others are a star system with many intelligent planets. Even more powerful are those like the Marvel Universe, with numerous galaxies, countless planets, countless intelligent life forms, and countless suns. The former can be considered the initial stage of a single universe, While the latter is the peak of a single universe, they are incomparable. Of course, this doesn't mean that a single continent is necessarily weak. If all efforts are devoted to the development of a single continent, and that continent's size, the life forms within it, the laws governing it, and other aspects all exceed normal levels, then it is not weak. Like Middle-earth, the entire continent's volume significantly surpasses that of a normal planet, and the intensity of life within it, the abundance of energy, etc., are incomparable to ordinary planets. Even more powerful are those primordial worlds, flat and square, inhabited by various powerful beings, without other galaxies or parallel worlds. Yet, within them are 3,000 great worlds, countless small worlds, and even the concept of a single flower containing a world, far more terrifying than a normal multiverse. The ranking system he is currently researching is actually an extension of the Marvel Universe. However, in the myriad worlds, it can only serve as a certain reference. Different worlds have different ranking systems, and ultimately, it depends on specific strength. In any case, he is currently not on the same level as Ilovator. I know you're unwilling, but as a human, my child, I'm happy you've come this far. Melker was indeed wrong, and I will imprison him in the Hall of Eternity, never to be allowed back into Arda. As for your losses, I will compensate you, allowing you to come to the Hall of Eternity at any time. I can personally teach you how to perfect your world. The shadow nodded upon hearing George's reply, then vanished from the small world with Morgoth's soul. George, however, was overjoyed. He knew he hadn't lost out, he had gained a huge advantage. For him, advancing from an individual to a single universe level wasn't particularly difficult. Without Morgoth, he only needed to continue absorbing the power of chaos and the Phoenix Force. Advancement was inevitable. Even without the power of chaos and the Phoenix Force, he could find ego in various universes, absorb several egos, and still advance. With so many celestial-level villains in the Marvel Universe, it wouldn't be a problem with time. He also had connections with the Time Bureau. What's difficult is perfecting your own little world and elevating it into a truly complete world. Chapter 637 Entering the Eternal Palace. Why is perfecting one's own little world so difficult? Because at the individual, single universe level, George can advance simply by absorbing enough energy. But there's no shortcut to perfecting one's own little world and advancing to the single universe level. He needs to study various magics, understand the fundamental laws of the world, and apply them little by little to his own world. The basic elemental structure of a world, time, space, soul, creation, life, reincarnation, and so on, is extremely complex. Originally, he planned to use Morgoth's head as a stepping stone to Valinor and learn from the gods. But the gods are no match for Ilovator. If Ilovator is willing to impart her experience and laws of world creation to him, he believes he can advance in no time. And more importantly, perhaps he can find the answer to a long-standing question from Ilovator. This question has been with him since he first transmigrated to the Marvel Universe. Solving this question might allow him to truly merge his various avatars with his main body in the future. Actually, it wasn't all for nothing. Coming back to his senses, he extended his right hand, where 3 dazzling diamonds now lay. These 3 diamonds were the Silmarils, which Morgoth had stolen from the Noldor elves, and the very reason the Noldor left Valinor. Absorbing the power of these 3 Silmarils should be enough to break through to the single universe level, although he had only devoured Morgoth's body this time, not his most important soul, he had still obtained the 3 Silmarils. The 3 Silmarils were the masterpiece of Fëanor, the most talented elf prince of the Noldor, known for his forging prowess. They contained the radiance of the 2 trees, a marvel even to the gods, and were the most powerful artifacts in Middle-earth. Pack up the mess first, then head to the Hall of Eternity. Ilovator had left a mark for him before leaving. He could teleport there at any time by following the mark. Leaving his own little world, George appeared in the mortal realm, before the combined forces of the 3 races. George, how did it go? The current High King of the Noldor, Fingal, anxiously approached George upon seeing him and asked. They couldn't get involved in the previous battles at all. They finally managed to force Morgoth out, and just as they were about to gang up on him, George and Morgoth disappeared again. Morgoth's physical body has been destroyed, and his soul has been taken to the Hall of Eternity and imprisoned. From now on, there will be no more orcs in this world. George briefly recounted the events, except for the fact that he had taken the Silmaril. Knowing that Morgoth was dead, and that they no longer had to worry about orc attacks or invasion by dark forces, the 3 races' allied forces cheered. Morgoth had been a mountain weighing on their hearts for countless years. Now, this mountain had finally been removed by George. How could they not be happy? Most importantly, in this war that they had expected to be a fierce battle, a war in which they had already made arrangements for their families before setting out, not a single one of them had died. I wonder if this harmony will continue in the future, George thought to himself, watching the three races cheer and embrace. The reason the three races could work so unitedly and be so harmonious was simply because they had a common enemy. Now that Morgoth is dead, the future will likely be a war between the three races. This is quite normal. Even gods have desires and wage war, let alone humans, elves, and dwarves. But this is none of his concern. He doesn't have the energy to worry about the future of the three races. From beginning to end, his only goal has been self-improvement, establishing a magic academy, uniting the three races, researching alchemy, and defeating Sorin, Glorin, Gothmog, and Kerrigan, and Morgoth. These are all secondary, everything else is just incidental. Now that his goal has been achieved, he no longer cares how the three races develop in the future, or whether they will follow the original story. After the great victory, there will undoubtedly be a night of revelry, and George, not wanting to spoil the fun, joined in. There's no rush. Although everything he did was for self-improvement, after so much time together, there has been some affection. The next day, after giving Lothian a few instructions, George teleported away from Middle-earth using the special coordinates left by Iluvatar. Middle-earth is not like Earth, it's not a round planet, but rather a cone-shaped continent. Beyond the continent, in the void, there are many planet-like meteorites. Therefore, the night sky over Middle-earth is filled with stars. The Eternal Palace lies among these stars, Iluvatar's solitary residence. He often stands within the palace, observing everything that happens in Middle-earth and making adjustments secretly according to his own ideas. However, he generally doesn't interfere in matters that aren't particularly serious. A few years ago, he suddenly discovered a strange note appearing in his grand narrative, a note that actually affected the entire narrative, greatly altering what was originally predetermined. This caught his attention, and he focused his gaze on this note. He discovered that this strange note was actually a human, a very unique human. This human was powerful and growing rapidly, and crucially, the power he used did not belong to the world he created. This is so handsome beautiful. In the Eternal Palace, when George first saw Iluvatar in human form, he couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. Lucier was, in all his worlds, the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. Now, Iluvatar struck him as even more beautiful than Lothian, an indescribable beauty, surpassing anything that could be expressed in words. He couldn't even tell if she was beautiful or handsome. But thinking about it, it made sense. Judging from the elves Iluvatar created, she was clearly a sucker for good looks. Is this guy male or female, or does he have no gender, or is he both male and female? After careful observation, George realized he couldn't discern Iluvatar's gender at all. Greetings, Great One. Suppressing his chaotic thoughts, George politely bowed to Iluvatar. However, he was interrupted halfway through. No need for such formalities. Although your body is my child, your soul doesn't belong to this world. Just call me Iluvatar. Have I been discovered? Hearing Iluvatar directly reveal his identity, George wasn't too surprised. Iluvatar had appeared when Morgoth was about to be devoured, so he knew he had already been noticed by Iluvatar. But he wasn't worried. Since Iluvatar didn't attack him and was even willing to guide him on how to improve his small world, it meant she meant him no harm. Even if she did, there was nothing he could do. Iluvatar could easily kill him. Chapter 638 Innate Life Forms in Chaos. For George, this body was merely an avatar. Even if he lost it, it wasn't unacceptable. As long as he could learn from Iluvatar how to perfect his small world, it would be worthwhile. Because once he learned the method and perfected his small world, his main body and other avatars could also advance. Even if Iluvatar had some ulterior motive, and later devoured his body and world, he wouldn't feel he'd lost too much. So even though Iluvatar exposed his identity, he wasn't particularly panicked, though he certainly couldn't appear calm on the surface. I didn't expect you to discover me. I don't actually know why I came to this world, my soul attached to this body. He genuinely didn't know why he came to this world, and creating avatars wasn't something he controlled. He wasn't lying about that. However, he wouldn't tell Iluvatar that this body was just an avatar, nor would he tell him that he had different avatars in different worlds. He said this as a test, to see if Illavidor knew that other worlds existed outside the worlds he created. His long-held question was, what lay beyond these worlds of his avatars? Did the creator of these worlds know that other worlds existed? If so, was there a way to enter another world from one? If so, could all his avatars eventually be retrieved? He had never directly faced the creator of a world before, and now that he had the opportunity, he naturally wanted to test him. It's normal that you don't know. There are many powerful creators who, when they have nothing better to do, like to scatter the souls of the creatures from their worlds everywhere. Illavidor gestured for George to sit opposite her. George's heart skipped a beat upon hearing this. There are creators more powerful than you. I'm not that powerful. Don't be so careful. I know you have many questions, and I can tell you everything. Illavidor casually waved her hand, and a jug of fine wine appeared on the table. Consider this compensation for letting Melkor go. Humans and elves were creatures he created, but the Valor and Mayor were parts of his consciousness, essentially a part of him. Manwa and Vardna's were positive thoughts, while Melkor's were negative. So even though Melkor had committed many evils, he couldn't let George devour Melkor's soul, because this would also be detrimental to him. The loss of Mayor like Soren and Gothmog wouldn't affect his power or his world. But Valor like Morgoth were different. However, he couldn't forcefully stop George. He didn't want to create any enmity with him. Although George's current strength was inferior to his, George's growth rate was rapid. In just a few years, he had already reached the strength of a minimum-level creator. Behind him must be an extremely powerful creator. To be able to send someone to his world for reincarnation without his knowledge, the creator's strength must be far greater than his own. Such a being was best avoided. If George were some great evil who would threaten him and the world he created in the future, he wouldn't let George go, even at great risk. But after observing him for the past few years, he found George wasn't a bad person. It was better to befriend him while his power was still insufficient than to offend him. This was why he was willing to guide George in perfecting his small world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to appear personally. Informing the gods of Valinor and letting them handle it would have been enough. Thank you very much. George bowed respectfully to Illavidor. I would like to know, what should I do if I want to return to my own world? It's perfectly normal for someone whose soul has transmigrated to another world to want to return to their own, so this question is quite reasonable. Let me tell you about my situation first, so you can understand more easily and naturally know the answer. Illavidor didn't doubt him. He pondered for a moment, then said, when I awoke, I was in a state of chaos, with nothing at all. Later, I instinctively began to absorb energy and gradually grew. With Illavidor's explanation, George finally gained a general understanding of the entire cosmic system. Simply put, in Illavidor's understanding, he was born in chaos and can be considered a primordial life form within chaos. After growing to a certain stage, in order to explore life forms similar to himself, he began to travel through chaos. During this time, he encountered primordial life forms similar to him, some weaker than him, some stronger, some friendly, and some wanting to devour him to strengthen themselves. Upon reaching a certain stage of growth, he learned from those powerful beings and began creating his own world, Middle-earth, where George now resides. After creating the world, he gradually expanded it, creating the Valor and Mayor to further strengthen it. Later, he created the elves and humans. This was essentially the same story George knew about Middle-earth in his previous life. The only thing he hadn't anticipated was that everything was actually following a predetermined cycle of fate set by Illavidor. Like the Marvel Universe, where everything in the universe is fixed and unchanging within a single sacred timeline. For example, the birth of Captain America, the gathering of the Avengers, Thanos' snap, and Iron Man's sacrifice. Middle-earth was similar. After the establishment of Arda, from the age of the Great Lamp to the age of the Two Trees to the age of the Sun, and then the first, second, third, and fourth ages of the Age of the Sun, everything was woven by Illavidor. Beyond this, Illavidor was also creating second and third parallel worlds, progressing from a single universe to a multiverse. However, George's appearance altered one of the timelines, deviating from the predetermined path. Of course, this wasn't a major issue. As long as George didn't interfere further, everything would return to normal many years later. The elves would still completely disappear in the Fourth Age, and the world would ultimately develop with humans as the primary focus. So, in chaos, everyone is a naturally occurring life form like you? George asked after a long pause. Illavidor shook her head, not exactly. Initially, everyone should indeed be a naturally occurring life form. But as worlds are created, especially as they grow and expand, powerful, acquired life forms will emerge within them. They create their own worlds, then break free from the constraints of their original worlds, entering chaos to carve out their own domain. Like you, if you perfect your small world, I won't stop you. You can leave my world and freely develop in chaos. Chapter 639 Elevators Comics and Novels. In other words, if I reach the single universe level, I should be qualified to search for other worlds in the chaos. At this moment, George's heart was pounding with excitement. According to Elevator, his previous method of using the fusion of his clones to advance to the multiverse had become feasible. However, it was only feasible. There were still many difficulties. First, not every creator of every world was as easy to talk to as Elevator, willing to let him leave to search for other clones in the chaos after he advanced to the single universe level. If the creator discovered him as an outsider and wanted to devour him, or did not want him to leave, then he would have to force his way out. Second, someone like Elevator, who had just advanced to the initial stage of the multiverse, might have a chance to force his way out after entering the single universe level, perhaps with the added strength of his clones in various universes. But in a world like Marvel, where the creators are all-powerful universe-level beings, he would only have a chance to force his way out if he advanced to the super-universe level. Third, according to Elevator, the chaos was not peaceful either. Traveling within it, if one encounters a particularly evil creator, one might be completely devoured, leaving nothing behind. Therefore, even traveling at the single universe level is still somewhat dangerous. Fourth, there is no concept of time in chaos, and with the strength of a single universe level individual, encountering another creator or another world within chaos is not easy. This is because whether life forms are born in chaos or acquired from another world, the places they choose to create and expand their worlds will always be very, very far away from other creators, unless the two creators have a very good relationship. However, one good thing is that there is a connection between their main body and the souls of all their avatars. They are single consciousness from beginning to end and can transfer soul power to each other. Therefore, in chaos, they should be able to find a general direction using this connection, instead of searching aimlessly like headless flies. It can only be said that the stronger one is, the higher the probability that their avatars and main body can reunite. It is best to wait until one reaches the peak of the single universe level before considering seeking avatars to merge with, which is the safest approach. Moreover, avatars that are easy to leave should be left first. Just like in Middle-earth, where Elevator wouldn't prevent him from leaving, his clone from that world could meet up with clones from other worlds that were also relatively easy to leave in the chaos. The fusion of two single universe level clones would be enough to break through to the multiverse level. This would allow other clones to advance to the multiverse level as well, making it easier for them to leave their respective worlds. With each clone fused, everyone's overall strength would increase, until finally, when all clones had merged into the macrocosm level. Then, he could try to allow his main body to attempt to break out of a world like Marvel, where the creator is an omnipotent universe. However, to complete this plan, he needed a sufficient number of clones, otherwise, cultivating to the macrocosm level on his own would take an unknown amount of time. With enough clones, through continuous fusion, he could quickly and steadily advance to the macrocosm level. By the way, can I ask what kind of world you originally came from? Perhaps I've been there before, Elevator asked curiously as George pondered his advancement plan. My world, well, it's like this. There are lots of mages, and mage guilds. George thought for a moment and gave a general description of the fairy tale world. He often used fairy tale magic in his battles there, so to be on the safe side, he chose that world. That way, even if Elevator had been there before, she wouldn't suspect anything. This world. I vaguely remember it. No wonder the magic you used looked familiar. Elevator's face lit up with realization. George's eyes widened immediately. He was just being cautious. He hadn't expected Elevator to actually have been there. You've been to my world? No, I haven't. I wasn't strong enough back then. In a world with multiple parallel universes, the creators wouldn't be weaker than me. I wouldn't dare go in. Elevator waved her hand with a smile. The worlds I went to before were all very ordinary. The creators were only slightly stronger than you are now, and the life forms there didn't even use magic or anything like that. Then how do you know about my world? George was now bewildered. Elevator waved her hand, and a thick comic book appeared on the table. It's because I read this. A comic book? George stared at the comic book on the table, which read Fairy Tale, and nearly jumped out of his chair in surprise. How could Elevator have a comic book? Even he hadn't read fairy tale, only vaguely heard of it in his previous life, so he guessed that the fairy tale world might be from some anime or manga from his past life. He quickly flipped through the comic book, looking at Elevator with a puzzled expression. How did you get this? The comic recorded the adventures of Natsu and Lucy, and although it differed slightly from his own experiences, it was generally similar. The discrepancies likely stemmed from his presence affecting the story's normal development. Just like in Middle-earth, he had influenced the story originally set by Elevator there. If he hadn't appeared, then the story in the fairy tale world might have been what was depicted in this comic. The Black Dragon was ultimately defeated by Natsu and his friends working together. This was a gift from a creator who passed through my area. Elevator waved her hand again, and a large pile of comic books and novels appeared on the table. In Chaos, there are many very powerful creators. I'm not quite sure how powerful they are exactly. They don't like staying in the worlds they created, they prefer to travel through chaos and record the stories of the worlds created by these creators. These books are a gift from him. Similarly, he also recorded the stories of my world, saying that he would give them to the creators of other worlds when he went there. He said it was called reciprocity. By the way, he really liked the stories of the Third Age in my world, naming them The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, and The Lord of the Rings. Did he say what his name was? George asked calmly, suppressing a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Elevator picked up a book from the pile on the table. He said his name was Hongjin, and this is the story of his world. Good heavens, Investiture of the Gods. George glanced at the title, his heart shattered. Chapter 640 Evolving Planets. So all those movies, TV shows, novels, anime, and comics I watched in my past life came about like this. At this moment, George recalled his past life. He boldly guessed that the world he lived in might also have a creator. This creator, like Elevator, received storybooks left behind by one or more passing creators, and then incorporated these stories into their own world. Thus, the humans of his world presented these stories in various ways during their creation. However, he guessed that the creator of his past life's world probably wasn't very powerful. After all, his past life's world was just an ordinary world without any extraordinary powers. Maybe. He suddenly realized that in his past life he was just an ordinary person, and even if there were any extraordinary powers in the world, he wouldn't have been able to discover them. But it doesn't matter now, since he's not in that world anymore. If he becomes powerful enough in the future, he will definitely go back to see it. Now he cares more about who sent him to the Marvel world and gave him the ability to create clones in various worlds. Anyway, whoever it was, he was grateful to them. If it weren't for this powerful being, he would still be living the life of an ordinary worker, worrying about housing, cars, and children every day. His lifespan would be a mere 100 years, or even less, dying from accidents or illness. Unlike now, he not only possesses unimaginable power but also has had so many interesting experiences. As for whether the other party did this for fun or with some ulterior motive, that's a matter for the future. With his current strength, he probably wouldn't even be of any interest to the other party. Gathering his thoughts, George stopped dwelling on these currently unimportant issues and began to get to the point, asking Elevator how to improve his own small world. Creating his own world and advancing to the single universe level was the most important thing right now. Without reaching the single universe level, even surviving in the chaos would be a problem. Elevator kept her promise and began to guide George diligently. Actually, it was more of a mutual exchange in learning than guidance. George's strength, while not as great as Elevator's, was more accurately described as not being on the same level at all. However, he also had his advantages. The laws governing his small world were derived from the magic he learned in different worlds, taking the essence and discarding the dross. Therefore, many of the laws contained within were highly beneficial to Elevator after he understood them, giving him great inspiration. If examined closely, the benefits Elevator gained were far greater than those of George. George was already at the peak of the Heavenly Father level, only one step away from entering the single universe level, both in terms of individual strength and small world. Even without Elevator's guidance, he could break through on his own in a few decades or centuries at most. Elevator, on the other hand, was at the early stage of breaking through to the multiverse level, and basically, without special circumstances, it would be difficult for him to make any significant progress. If he wanted to reach the next level, the time required would be incalculable. That's why he spent his days watching the development of his Middle-earth repeatedly, like watching a movie. But since communicating with George and coming into contact with the knowledge of many other worlds, he had begun to show signs of further breakthroughs. It was precisely because of this that during the time George came to the Hall of Eternity to seek guidance, the relationship between the two grew increasingly closer, even reaching the point of being like brothers. Oh, saying they're like brothers isn't quite accurate, because Illavidor has no gender. George was merely assuming he was male. Whether Illavidor was male or female was entirely up to his own whim. And so, a few months later, in George's world. Little George, your world is basically complete. Just spend a little more time allowing the laws added during this period to fully integrate, and it'll essentially advance. Then, adjust a flow of time, and this land will evolve naturally according to the laws, eventually developing the intelligent life you've set out for. Illavidor pointed to a planet George had created that was exactly like Earth, and said with a face full of satisfaction. George smiled and nodded. I have to thank Brother Yeru for his guidance, otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to complete it so quickly. He hadn't completely followed Illavidor's guidance to create a cone-shaped continent like Middle-earth, but rather made modifications based on her instructions. Finally, using Earth as a template, he created the planet we see now. Because the most powerful world he'd ever seen so far was the Marvel Multiverse, with the strongest beings possibly being at the omnipotent universe level. Therefore, using the Marvel Universe as a template was naturally the most suitable. He would first create Earth, then develop the solar system, the Milky Way, and other star systems around it. He believed that developing to the peak of a single universe using this template would definitely be far stronger than Illavidor's peak single universe level. In the future, after his clones merged and entered the multiverse, they would definitely not be weak even at the multiverse level. Actually, he felt that the flat, earthly world of the primordial world would be no less impressive, but unfortunately, he hadn't been to a similar world and had no template to refer to. Time acceleration. With a wave of his hand, he activated the time laws of the small world, accelerating the flow of time to its maximum. George and Illavidor disappeared and returned to the Eternal Palace. At the highest time flow, Earth and the small world would evolve from single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms, then to amphibians, and finally from the ocean to the continent. This entire evolutionary process was based on the settings of his previous life, until true intelligent life appeared on the planet, and civilization began to emerge. Then the chain reaction he set up would be fully activated, and the entire small world would step into a truly complete world, forming an independent universe. At this point, it would also mean that he had truly advanced to the single universe level. Not an individual advancement, but an advancement in the form of a world, which also meant that he had become a creator of the lowest level. Because the laws accelerated time, this process would not be too long. He calculated that it would only take a few months to complete. Besides Illavidor's guidance, there was another very important factor that enabled him to complete it so quickly: the 3 Silmarils. Originally, he planned to absorb the power of the 3 Silmarils to accelerate his individual advancement to the single universe level. However, later, at Illavidor's suggestion, he changed his approach and forged the 3 Silmarils into the small world star, which allowed him to perfect the small world so quickly. Otherwise, if he had relied entirely on himself to create a sun within the small world, it would probably have taken more than 10 years. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 641: The Way to Escape the Creator. It's important to understand that a sun containing such immense energy isn't easy to create. The Silmaril absorbed the light of the twin trees, possessing power similar to the sun. Using this as a foundation to create the sun greatly saved time. Therefore, in his small world, Earth isn't surrounded by a single large sun, but rather by 3 smaller suns. Compared to individual advancement, the advancement of the small world is definitely more important. In his view, a single universe-level powerhouse with their own world, even if they've just advanced, could probably defeat 10 single universe-level powerhouses without their own world. Besides, even without the Silmaril, with the ability to continuously absorb energy, individual advancement to the single universe level is only a matter of time. Brother Yeru, I have something I'd like to ask you. After returning to the main hall, George conjured a jar of fine wine and poured a cup for Oliver. Oliver accepted the wine and drank it all in one gulp. There's no need for such formalities between us. Ask me anything. It's like this, brother. After my advancement, I plan to venture into the chaos to see if I can find my original world. I also want to see other worlds, learn more new things, and improve myself. However, the chaos is dangerous, and many creators aren't as kind as you, brother. So, since learning about the chaos and creators from Oliver, he had been considering a question. That was, in the worlds of his other avatars, had the creators of those worlds noticed his anomaly, just as Oliver had? If they had, why hadn't they shown themselves? Were they indifferent to his existence, or were they wary of the powerful being who sent his soul into that world? If they hadn't, what was the reason? And most importantly, if you were to create a new avatar, was there any way to avoid being discovered? He had no experience with these things, but Oliver, as a creator, had traveled to the chaos and entered many worlds, so he must have some understanding. Oliver wasn't surprised by George's question. Having spent time together, he knew George wasn't one to settle for the status quo. He wouldn't stop progressing just because he had his own world. Even after he spoke of the dangers of chaos, nothing could deter George's determination to enter it. In fact, he quite wanted George to stay by his side, at least to have someone to communicate with. Since you've made your decision, I'll tell you everything I know, Oliver said without hiding anything. First, not all worlds have a creator. Some worlds, though functioning normally, have a creator who is dead. George blinked. Oliver explained, the first scenario is that the creator places their world in a fixed location and travels through chaos, only to encounter a powerful enemy and be killed. This is a case of poor judgment. Remember, when traveling through chaos, you must bring your world with you, otherwise, without the world's support, your strength will be greatly reduced when encountering a powerful enemy. Of course, if your strength is already top tier in chaos, you don't need to worry about this. For example, the powerful being named Hongjin, even without a world, moves freely in chaos. The second scenario is that the creator is killed by creatures within their own world. This is rare, but not impossible. The third scenario is that after creating their world, the creator becomes part of it to stabilize it. For example, as the powerful being Hongjin said, the creator of his world, Pangu, did just that. That's indeed the case. According to mythological novels, Pangu, who created heaven and earth, should be the creator of the primordial world, while Hongjin later became the heavenly Dao. But with Hongjin's power, he could probably create countless worlds with a wave of his hand, surpassing 99% of the creators in chaos. The key is that this guy is still wandering around in the chaos. He's very knowledgeable, quite terrifying. Hearing Oliver's analysis, George nodded in agreement. Secondly, not all creators are as bored as I am, constantly watching their own worlds. Some creators might cultivate for a very long time before even glancing at their world, and unless something devastating happens to destroy the entire world, they won't pay any attention. Moreover, some creators don't even set the fate cycle of their worlds. How the world develops is entirely up to them. Oliver paused and continued, finally, there's another possibility. Some creators have problems with their cultivation, perhaps splitting into several personalities, fighting each other in their own worlds. I see. After Oliver's explanation, George had a better understanding. Those creators whose worlds are dead, or traveling in the chaos, are the safest, as they won't be discovered. The same goes for those creators focused solely on cultivation. As long as they don't destroy their worlds, there shouldn't be much of a problem. As for the creator himself experiencing cultivation problems, he's preoccupied with his own internal struggles and has even less energy to concern himself with them. The troublesome ones are actually people like Oliver, who like to observe their own world and set predetermined destinies for it. This makes them easily noticeable and prone to anomalies if they even slightly show their face. If they're well-intentioned, that's fine, but if they're malicious, then they're in trouble. If you encounter a creator like me, it's not entirely impossible to avoid being discovered. As if reading George's mind, Oliver smiled. First, once you enter his world, never use any power systems outside of his world. Like your light magic, I sensed it the first time you used it. If you only used physical power, I wouldn't have noticed so easily. If you, after appearing, continuously learn and use the power systems of my world, then even if I observe you, I'll only think you're an anomaly. Although I've set a predetermined trajectory of fate, It's not the same every time. There will be various unexpected situations, and as long as they don't significantly affect the final outcome, I'll find them interesting. Besides, I can't keep an eye on the world all the time, like Loki. George suddenly understood. That Loki, the god of stories, wasn't that an unexpected situation? The time management machine used to frequently cut out characters who didn't follow the plot. What if I encounter a powerful enemy that I can't defeat with physical strength alone? If it's you now, there's nothing you can do. If you use power that doesn't belong in this world, you'll inevitably be discovered. But once your own world has advanced, there won't be a problem. You can pull your enemy into your own world, and what happens there won't be detected by the creator. However, you must be careful not to do this while the creator is watching you. Generally, unless you attract the creator's special attention, he won't keep watching you. Oliver gave her answer again. Chapter 642 The World of the Elder Scrolls. Looks like I'll have to be careful next time a new clone appears. After figuring out the whole situation, George already had a plan in mind. He could let it go before when he didn't know. Perhaps in his clone worlds, the creator was already gone. Maybe the creator hadn't discovered him, or perhaps they discovered him but were too wary to deal with him. But now, with new clones appearing, he couldn't be so reckless. What if he entered a world like the primordial era, where the creator completely ignored the powerful being behind him and instantly killed him? That would be a huge pity. Or what if he encountered a reckless creator who wouldn't care who was behind him, and would kill anyone who dared to invade his world? Then he'd lose another clone. He used to be cautious with new worlds he knew nothing about. He would first gather intelligence, understand the world roughly, and only reveal his strength to collect knowledge and resources after confirming there were no threats. But now he had to be even more cautious. Because he was no longer facing the highest combat power in a new world, but the creator of that new world. So, as Oliver said, without knowing whether the creator exists, what state they are in, or what their strength is, one should avoid using magic and abilities outside one's own world. In fact, even using only physical strength, with his current physique, there's absolutely no need to worry too much. Even in the primordial world, his physical body, while not comparable to a sainted monkey or a three-eyed child, could easily sweep aside most of the gods in heaven. Moreover, once he advances to the single universe level and undergoes a life essence leap, his physical body will be greatly enhanced. If he encounters a danger that his physical strength cannot handle, he can risk being discovered and pull it into his own world to resolve it. If it becomes a last resort, even complete exposure, he will definitely resolve the danger. A living person won't die from holding the pea. Even if the creator discovers him, it doesn't mean there's absolutely no chance of survival. Encountering someone like Oliver, he'll be fine. The worst case scenario is complete exposure and a fight. As a single universe level being with his own world, he's not someone to be trifled with. If he can't win, can't he at least escape? Unless the difference in strength is truly too great, at most he'll only lose one clone. He can return and fight again when his combined strength is greater. Besides, at his current level, entering a new world and learning its power system will be quick. His physical body combined with a local power system will be sufficient. After advancing, I'll test the waters a bit. He doesn't need to test a Marvel main world, but for the other clone worlds, he thinks he can try contacting the creator after advancing to the single universe level. He didn't hide his abilities in the previous clone worlds. If the creator is present, they would almost certainly be exposed. Since they were exposed but didn't directly attack him, it means there's a possibility of befriending him. Rather than pretending not to know, it's better to take the initiative and perhaps become friends like with Oliver, exchanging knowledge and improving together. If the creator is not there, or is dead, he can simply devour that world and make it his own, greatly increasing his strength. Of course. This is all on the premise that he advances to the single universe level and his strength is stable. Here we go again, just like how it always happens when you think of it. Just as George and Oliver were exchanging magic, he suddenly jolted, muttering to himself. Indeed, another new clone of him had appeared. This is the world of the Elder Scrolls. His main consciousness shifted to the new clone, and after quickly reviewing the body's memories, George immediately made a judgment. The new clone was named Locke, originally a Brighton resident of Lorik, Whitron, Skyrim. Due to gambling debts, he wanted to steal a horse to escape to Hammerfall. However, he was captured by the Imperial Army as a Stormcloak spy and was to be beheaded along with some Stormcloak soldiers. The cowardly George died of a heart attack on the transport wagon, allowing George to take over his body. "Hey, you're finally awake." George had just adjusted to his new body and opened his eyes when he heard a gruff voice beside him. However, this greeting wasn't directed at him, but at a Nord youth diagonally opposite him, who had been arrested for illegally crossing the border. The one who spoke was a Stormcloak soldier of exceptionally robust build sitting next to him. Dragonborn, Stormcloak soldier Ralph, and Stormcloak leader Ulfric. A quick glance at the three men in the carriage was enough for George to guess their identities. He was able to confirm their identities so quickly because he had played the Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim. While he couldn't claim complete understanding, he had a general idea. It was back in college when he saw his roommate playing a role-playing game and was immediately awestruck. Not because he found the game particularly fun, he hadn't played similar games much before and wasn't particularly interested in that genre, but because he had never seen such a revealing, colorful game before, almost comparable to some adult games banned in China. Young men are often impulsive and easily succumb to temptation, and unsurprisingly, he was drawn into the trap. And he wasn't the only one, everyone in his dorm had been lured in. However, once he got into the game, he realized that he and his roommate were playing completely different games. His roommate's graphics were so beautiful because he had installed a series of mods. But after playing for a while, he found that even without those mods, the game itself was quite fun. So in the end, he still finished the game. However, he wasn't a hardcore gamer, he didn't have the money to buy a computer when he was in college, and he had even less time to play after starting work. Therefore, he didn't play it many times in depth, and he only had a general understanding of the vast world building and complex history. His understanding in some aspects might not be accurate. If he wanted to truly understand, he would need to read more history books and dig deeper into the unknown information in the future. Because, according to his impression, the power of the creator of this world should be no less than that of Iluvatar. After all, many Daedric princes have their own independent spaces. If the power of those Daedric princes had reached the level of a single universe, then the creator of this world had at least reached the level of a multiverse. He hadn't even broken through to the level of a single universe yet, so naturally he needed to understand the situation of this world more clearly. Then hide his identity as an outsider, and slowly acquire his identity in this world. In particular, the Dragonborn sitting diagonally opposite him was probably being watched by the Time Dragon god Akka at any moment. He couldn't afford to give himself away now. Chapter 643 Empire and the Stormcloak. Let me first share some general information he knows. This information may not be accurate, because even his roommate, who was obsessed with the Elder Scrolls and his past life and had extensive knowledge of its history, couldn't be sure if the information he gave him was correct. It's quite controversial. Anyway, let's understand it this way for now, as a reference point. It is said that this world originated from a head, which George now believes might be the head of the true creator of this world. This head had a dream one day, and then the world split into Anu and Padome. They represent eternity and change, respectively. The collision of Anu and Padome created Orbis, the universe where the Elder Scrolls are located. Afterwards, Anu split to create the Time Dragon god Akka, and Padome split to create the Serpent god Lockham. Lockham tricked Akka into creating the world, and the planet Nirn was born. During this time, Akka gave rise to a large number of Hydra, and Lockham gave rise to a large number of Daedra. After creation was completed, some Hydra discovered that the world they created was different from what they had imagined. It was not eternal and unchanging, but constantly changing, slowly trapping and eroding them. The quickest to react was Hydra Magnus, the creator engineer. He led the Hydras away from Nirn and into the Horizon of Light to avoid being swallowed by the New World. During his escape from the annihilation hell of the west to the Horizon of Light, the void Magnus created formed the sun. The voids created by the other Hydras formed stars. The remaining primal spirits, the Hydras, began to merge into the world they created. Except for Akka and a few powerful primal spirits who could maintain their infinity, the remaining primal spirits had to reproduce and condense themselves into finite existences to enter the cycle of life and death. The few primal spirits who could maintain their infinity are the holy spirits currently worshipped in this world. They transformed into planets orbiting Nirn to protect the world they created from being pulled into the Annihilation Realm by the Daedras. The Daedras, hiding in the Annihilation Realm, were unaffected by the world's devouring and their power remained intact. Because of Lockham's temptation to create the world, the dragon god Akka suffered a great loss of power and, in anger, tore apart the body he shared with Lockham. The heart was removed and fixed in the red mountain of the Moroine continent. This process of tearing open the chest gave birth to the moon, which was the body torn in two. Therefore, Nirn is surrounded by two moons. After that came the Elven era, the first era, the second era, the third era, and the fourth era. He is currently in the fourth era. In this era, the dragon god Akka blessed a dragon soul dragonborn, hoping he could destroy the world eater Alduin. This blessed dragon soul dragonborn sat diagonally opposite him. To avoid being discovered by Akka, George decided to play his current role well, stay away from the dragonborn later, and slowly gather knowledge of this world. Knowledge is power. Oliver said that once you reach the single universe level, if you want to expand your world and advance to the single universe level, you either have to spend time slowly honing your skills or learn new knowledge. Even Oliver, at the multiverse level, learned a lot about other worlds through communication with him, and her strength improved. Therefore, the purpose of his new world avatar is still, to learn, to learn, to learn. You were about to cross the border when you unexpectedly entered the Empire's ambush, just like us, and this little thief next to you too, seeing that the Dragonborn was awake, Larov said familiarly. George didn't refute, nodding naturally. The Dragonborn looked completely bewildered, clearly not understanding his current situation. Hey, horse thief, which town are you from? Larov turned to George when the Dragonborn youth didn't speak. Lorik town, you're from the Stormcloaks, right? Why as he gagged, George pretended to be curious, pointing to Ulfric opposite him who had his mouth sealed. Larov looked at Ulfric with respect. He is our High Lord Ulfric. Ulfric, Lord of Storm City, I've heard so much about you. George showed a suitable expression of surprise. He was currently on the continent of Tamriel on the planet Nirn, in the province of Skyrim. The continent of Tamriel had been in a state of war, with the Empire, primarily composed of humans, and the ancestral continent, primarily composed of high elves, locked in a fierce struggle. While the Empire briefly achieved a victory, it was unable to continue fighting and was forced to make peace with the ancestral continent, signing the unequal Treaty of the Platinum. The main points of the Treaty of the Platinum were, the Empire was required to abolish and prohibit the worship of Talis, and to accept the supervision of the Thalmor, the Blade's Edge, the Emperor's Guard and Intelligence Organization, and the cession of most of southern Hammerfell to the ancestral continent. Hammerfell, unwilling to accept the humiliating Treaty of the Platinum, declared independence from the Empire and continued fighting the ancestral continent, ultimately successfully repelling the ancestral continent's invasion of Hammerfell. On the Empire's side, the abolition of the worship of Talis led to widespread discontent among the Nords. In Nord culture, Talis was considered a hero, one of the very few humans to achieve godhood, and a symbol of the spirit. Therefore, the worship of Talis was widespread in Skyrim, the Nord homeland. Ulfric Stormcloak, Lord of Windhelm in Skyrim, the Eastern Territory, is a prime example. In early 201 AD, Emperor Titus Medii of the Empire supported Toig, the young Lord of Solitude, as the new High King of Skyrim, ruling the entire province. Ulfric Stormcloak, dissatisfied, engaged Toig, also a Nord, in a Nord duel within Solitude. He ultimately killed Toig with a dragon's roar. Some lords of Skyrim supported Ulfric as the new High King, seeking independence from the Empire. Others supported Solitude as Toig's wife, continuing to follow the Empire. A small minority remained neutral. Thus, a civil war broke out between the Empire and the Stormcloaks in Skyrim. Yesterday, Imperial General Tullius, aided by Thalmor intelligence, successfully ambushed Ulfric's forces on the border, capturing him alive. General Tullius originally intended to take Ulfric to Solitude for trial. But the Thalmor kept demanding Ulfric, and fearing things might get complicated, he didn't follow the law and go to Solitude. Instead, he went to the nearest Imperial fortress, Sanctuary. He planned to kill Ulfric privately first, then take his head to Solitude for trial. So George was now in the same carriage as Ulfric, heading to Sanctuary to await his execution. Ulfric was gagged because Tullius feared he would use his dragon shout. Chapter 644 Whether you die sooner or later, you're bound to die. This is Holy Land Town. I still have an old flame here. I wonder if Vered is still brewing mead with gin. As a castle-like fortress appeared before the carriage, Larov's face lit up with a sigh. It's funny to think back on it. When I was a child, I always felt so safe in the walls and towers of the Empire. Shut up, you damn dribbles. Hearing Larov's voice from the carriage behind, The soldier driving the carriage in Imperial armor immediately rebuked him with disgust. But George wasn't focused on the carriage. Instead, he was using his extraordinary hearing to gather intelligence on the entire army. Although he had temporarily sealed all his energy, including his mental power, to prevent the creator from discovering him, his physical body was still terrifyingly strong, and his senses were incredibly acute. If he wanted, his eyes could see a single hair on the ground 1,000 miles away, his ears could hear every sound within 1,000 miles, and his sense of smell was tens of thousands of times stronger than a dog's. However, under normal circumstances, one certainly wouldn't indulge one's 5 senses so freely, otherwise it wouldn't be a very comfortable thing. For example, if one completely let go of their sense of smell, the stench of a pile of excrement 1,000 miles away would be right in front of their nose. How disgusting. Therefore, the body's instincts usually limit the level of the 5 senses to normal level, automatically activating them when needed, and to what extent they are used is entirely up to them. Just like now, he only needs to amplify his hearing to the range of the escorting troops. General Tullius, the executioners are already in position in the town. As the escorting troops approached the military fortress of Holy Land Town, an Imperial soldier who had been waiting in front of the fortress loudly reported to Tullius, who was riding at the front. Tullius nodded in satisfaction. Very good, then let's get started quickly, and carry out the execution immediately after entering. But as soon as he finished speaking, a high elf wearing a thumber robe and 2 wood elves wearing magnificent elven armor caught up on horseback. General Tullius, halt. I will use the authority of the Thumber to detain these prisoners, the leading high elf commanded arrogantly. General Tullius, however, his eyes filled with disgust, retorted without flinching, Ambassador Elenwen, you surely don't want to miss a perfect execution, handing Ulfric over to the Thumber? What a joke. If the Thumber got their hands on Ulfric, the leader of the Stormcloaks, who knew how many schemes and plots they would devise to destroy the Empire? Although the Empire had signed the humiliating Platinum Pact, it didn't mean they had truly submitted to these high elves. It was merely a delaying tactic. Once the Empire recovered, it would inevitably drive these invading high elves back to their homeland, perhaps even sending a large army to conquer the ancestral lands. It was only because of this idiot Ulfric, disregarding the bigger picture, that he was now rebelling, needlessly weakening the Empire's military power. Taking advantage of this moment, killing Ulfric in one fell swoop and quelling the rebellion, lest things escalate, was the most important thing he, as an Imperial general, should do. According to the Platinum Agreement signed by your Emperor, you must obey the Thumber's supervision. I now order you again to hand these prisoners over to me for disposal. Seeing that Tullius was unwilling to hand over Ulfric, Thumber Ambassador Elenwen immediately invoked the Platinum Agreement, hoping to force Tullius to compromise. However, Tullius, who dared to disobey orders and act first, was unlikely to compromise now. You should know that my guest, Ulfric Stormcloak, was once a contender for the throne of Skyrim, a traitor to the Empire. I believe that as an Imperial general, I have the absolute right to deal with him. Drawing his top-grade enchanted longsword, Tullius's tone was extremely forceful. If you insist on taking him away, then the only solution is force. You've made a wrong decision. I will demand an explanation from your queen when I return. Elenwen's face turned green with anger, even though her face was naturally green. With only herself and 2 elven guards, how could she possibly be a match for the Empire's most elite warriors led by Tullius? She could only utter harsh words before turning and leaving the Holy Land town. There's this whole thing going on. I didn't even notice it when I was playing the game, George muttered to himself after hearing the conversation between Tullius and the Thumber Ambassador, Elenwen. The real world is the real world, and the game is the game. They're generally similar, but there are bound to be significant differences in the details. This is because many aspects of the game are designed to provide a better gaming experience for players and don't entirely reflect reality. The games from his previous life can only serve as a reference. One must compare them personally. The troops entered the fortress town and, after being surrounded by the townspeople, finally arrived at the innermost square, the execution ground. Everyone whose name is called, stand over there at the guillotine. After the carriage stopped, George and the other 3 were led off. A female officer in Imperial heavy armor walked up with a cold expression. The Empire loves those damned lists. Humph, formalism, Larov sneered, then looked at George with some surprise. I didn't expect you, a little horse thief, to have such audacity. He was about to be beheaded, yet he noticed no fear on George's face. As a veteran of the battlefield, he was used to death and was mentally prepared, but even he felt some dread. This civilian, mistakenly arrested, was so calm. Everyone dies eventually, whether early or late, there's nothing to be afraid of, George shrugged. Of course he wasn't afraid, because he wouldn't die. Hearing George's words, not only did Larov show admiration, but even Ulfric, whose mouth was gagged, glanced at him again. The bewildered Dragonborn felt the same way. I didn't expect you to have such courage. If I weren't about to return to Talus's embrace, I would really want to recruit you into army. The Stormcloaks need courageous people like you, even if you're a Brighton. You are too. George smiled and nodded, thinking to himself that if this were a game, he would probably have already received a side quest to join the Stormcloaks. To be honest, neither the Empire nor the Stormcloaks is righteous. They both have their problems. The Empire is corrupt, greedy, and careless with human life, with many issues. The Stormcloaks are racist and chaotic, so they aren't much better. In the end, it's the ordinary civilians who suffer in the war between the Empire and the Stormcloaks. Therefore, George didn't have a good impression of either side when playing the game. The only lord he felt was decent was his 8th aunt's husband in Whiterun, except for his mischievous children. Chapter 645 The Dragon That Devours the World. Ulfric Stormcloak, Lord of Windhelm, Halda, a soldier beside the Imperial female officer, held the list and called out Ulfric first. However, he wasn't immediately taken to behead him. Instead, he was first taken to General Tullius on the other side. Clearly, Tullius wanted to mock and curse Ulfric before he died, to vent his anger. After Ulfric was called, more than a dozen Stormcloak soldiers were called and led to the Guillotine, including Larov, who was born in Riverwood. Then it was his turn. Lorik Town, Lockle. George didn't run away out of fear like in the game, only to be shot dead on the spot by Imperial soldiers. Instead, he obediently allowed himself to be led to the Guillotine. After him was the Dragonborn. Although he was mistakenly arrested and not on the list, the presiding female officer still didn't let him go and brought him over as well. George didn't pay attention to the Dragonborn, because he didn't want to attract the attention of the Dragon God Akka. Although the Dragon God Akka wasn't the creator, based on his judgment, he was probably a manifestation of a part of the creator's consciousness, with power estimated to be at the peak of a single universe. Fortunately, he remembered that for some reason, holy spirits and demon gods couldn't easily descend directly into this world. Therefore, with him so well hidden, it should be even less likely that people would discover he was an outsider. However, being unnoticed was certainly safer. In the world of the Elder Scrolls, there were not only humans, but also vampires, werewolves, trolls, giants, and other magical creatures, as well as various powerful holy spirits and demon gods. Moreover, humans were not the only rulers of this world. The main intelligent life forms in this world were actually of 3 categories. The first was the human type, divided into Nords, Imperials, Bretons, and Rulduards. The second was the elven type, divided into High Elves, Wood Elves, Dark Elves, Orcs, Snow Elves, Vammer, and Dwarves. The third was the beast type, divided into Aragorn, Argonians, and Khajiit, Tigermen or Catmen. Roar. Just as Tullius finished judging Ulfric and was preparing to begin the execution, a strange sound suddenly came from afar in the sky. Ignore it. Carry out the execution. Tullius ignored the strange voice and continued to oversee the execution. Nothing was more important now than beheading Ulfric. George, meanwhile, smiled slightly, knowing it was Aldrin, the World Eater, making his appearance. Aldrin, the final boss of the game's main storyline, the most powerful dragon, the first dragon in the world, and the eldest son of Akatosh, the dragon god of time. In ancient times, dragons were worshipped as gods by the Nords, and Aldrin, as the leader of the dragon race, ruled over both dragons and humans. However, Aldrin and the dragon cult's brutal rule eventually provoked a Nord rebellion, leading to the dragon war between the Nords and the dragons. During the war, a dragon named Pathunax led some more human-friendly dragons to side with humans, fighting alongside them against Aldrin. Pathunax also taught humans how to use dragon roars, which allowed humans to create the dragon soul tear, a technique effective against dragons. This plot reminded him somewhat of the fairy tale world. The fairy tale world is also a war between dragons and humans. Some dragons sided with humans, and humans learned dragon slayer magic from them. In the end, the dragon race was wiped out, with the most powerful black dragon king, Acnologia, also a world-destroying dragon. He suspected that these creators might have seen stories from other worlds and thus arranged a similar fate for their own. Enough with the rant, let's get back to the main point. As the war between humans and dragons progressed, the rebel leaders, One-Eyed Harkin, Golden Sheath Gladius, and the Old Man Fidel, prepared to make a desperate gamble, using Dragon Soul Tear at the throat of the world to defeat Aldrin. In the battle against Aldrin, although the three heroes successfully weakened Aldrin's power with Dragon Soul Tear, Aldrin still gained the upper hand and killed Golden Sheath Gladius. Just as Harkin and the others were about to be defeated, the Old Man Fidel used a pre-prepared Elder Scroll to banish Aldrin, exiling him from the present era to the present day. Therefore, in Aldrin's eyes, he was just fighting the three heroes one moment, and the next he was 2,000 years in the future. Arriving in the Holy Land and unleashing a burst of fire wasn't actually to save the Dragonborn destined to kill him. He was simply frustrated and angry, and wanted to vent his frustration in a human town, which led him to rescue the Dragonborn about to be executed. After all, no one would be happy to be banished for 2,000 years. Many people felt the three heroes' actions were disastrous for their descendants, but George thought they were absolutely right. By using the Elder Scrolls to banish Aldrin, the world could at least continue for another 2,000 years. If they hadn't done so, the world would have been destroyed by Aldrin on the spot, ushering in a new era. As for whether their descendants 2,000 years later could defeat Aldrin, no one knew. People don't care about what happens after death, they live for as long as they can. If it were him, he would definitely have done the same. May your soul be released by the gods, pray to the 8 holy spirits. You are Nerns. After the priestess of Alcade's prayer, one by one, the Stormcloak soldiers were led to the Guillotine. The burly man wielding the executioner's axe chopped off the soldiers' heads with a single blow. Not here yet. George frowned slightly as he watched himself being led to the execution platform. In the game, after the first Stormcloak was beheaded, the Dragonborn would be taken up, and then Aldrin would appear, indirectly interrupting the execution. But in reality, 7 soldiers had already been beheaded, and it wasn't the Dragonborn's turn yet. Instead, it was his turn. It wouldn't be a big deal if it were his turn. After all, even if the sharp execution axe struck his neck, it would probably only leave a large gash, and he wouldn't lose a hair. But that would be too shocking, and he wanted to keep a low profile and not attract too much attention. Looks like this is the only way. Just as 2 Imperial soldiers walked up to him, about to lead him to the guillotine, he lightly lifted his right hind foot and quickly jerked it. With this action, the ground suddenly trembled, as if an earthquake had struck. Don't panic. Keep an eye on the prisoners. Gather them in the center of the square. Seeing the soldiers panicking due to the earthquake, Tullius immediately drew his longsword and shouted. The earthquake itself wasn't a big deal. He feared the chaos it would cause would give Ulfric an opportunity to escape. Finally, after using the earthquake to buy time for a few minutes, George's ears suddenly twitched, and he abruptly looked up at the sky. A ferocious dragon flew rapidly from afar, landing on the castle and unleashing a deafening roar. Chapter 646 How to Make Money? Roar. With the dragon's roar, countless enormous fireballs rained down from the sky, smashing the sturdy fortress to pieces and causing numerous deaths and injuries to the Imperial soldiers within. Stop standing there like idiots. Kill the thing. Guards, evacuate the villagers to safety. Oh no, I'm on fire. Help me, heavens, our attacks are useless against it. Faced with the sudden appearance of the dragon, even the Empire's most elite soldiers were terrified. Under General Tullius's command, the Imperial soldiers quickly launched a counterattack against Aldrin. Countless sharp arrows burst forth, including many powerful magic arrows and spells cast by Imperial mages. However, these attacks were like tickles to Aldrin, causing no harm whatsoever. On the contrary, when Aldrin breathed out a burst of dragon fire, the area below was filled with dead and wounded. Helpless, General Tullius had no choice but to organize his soldiers to lead the villagers of the town in an emergency retreat, hiding in the underground base of the Holy Land town fortress. The moment Aldrin appeared, George brute forcefully broke the ropes binding his hands. He then snatched a longsword from an Imperial soldier, freeing Ulfric, Larov, and the others. For him, it was a casual act. He didn't intend to join the Stormcloaks, but making a goodwill gesture might come in handy later. Besides, even without his help, Ulfric and the others would find a way to escape soon enough. The outcome would be the same. Thanks, let's go over there. Ulfric and Larov, rescued by George, first thanked him, then tried to pull him to the right-hand tower to escape Aldrin's attack. George waved them off. It was nothing, see you again sometime. Throwing away the Imperial longsword, George rushed towards the fortress entrance. The fireball summoned by Aldrin's dragon roar would be deadly to others, but for him, it was nothing. Even without using any magic to resist, the fireball hitting him would at most burn his clothes, causing no real harm. Besides, with his speed, he could easily dodge it precisely. Rather than entering the underground passage with Laerev and the others, getting entangled with the Dragonborn and Imperial soldiers, it was better to leave the Holy Land town directly and get away from the Dragon God Aka's sight. Dodging left and right, taking down any Imperial soldiers who blocked his way, he quickly returned to the initial entrance by following the shadows of the buildings, trying not to attract Aldrin's attention. It wasn't that he was afraid of Aldrin. Aside from the fact that Aldrin had just fought the 3 heroes and had been exiled for over 2,000 years, his strength was reduced to a mere tenth. Even at his peak, Aldrin's actual power was inferior to that of a demon god. And Aldrin's strength, in this world, would be considered that of a decent demon god. It's just that a demon god's power can only be maximized in their own space, and cannot exert much power in the mortal world. Of course, this was his speculation based on his experience playing the game. It cannot be taken as a fundamental basis. A game is a game, and reality is reality. Things in the game can only serve as a general standard of measurement. Ultimately, he'd have to judge based on his own experience. With his current strength, he could sense whether he could defeat Aldrin or not, and whether he posed a threat. At least for now, based on his own feeling. Aldrin above him didn't pose much of a threat. However, since he couldn't use his energy and relied solely on his physical body, it was hard to say. Therefore, he wanted to avoid conflict as much as possible, while also considering avoiding the attention of the Dragon God Aka. Locked. Upon arriving at the fortress gate, George found it locked and couldn't be opened normally. If he could use a lock-picking spell, it wouldn't be a problem at all, but since he couldn't use magic, he had to find another way. Jump over, he looked at the height of the gate, then at Aldrin still circling above the fortress, and shook his head. The fortress gate, though high, wasn't much to him, he could easily jump over it. But that would inevitably attract Aldrin's attention. So he chose a more direct and effective method. Half-turned, George leaned against the door, then with a powerful push of his heel, he smashed a human-shaped hole through the thick door, easily escaping Holy Land Town. Compared to the chaos in Holy Land Town, the sound of him breaking down the door wouldn't attract the attention of anyone, or even the dragons. I never thought that as a mage, I'd have to open doors this way. After escaping Holy Land Town, George glanced back at Aldrin, who was still circling and breathing fire above the town, shook his head with a smile, and headed north along the road. If he remembered correctly, the nearest town, Riverwood, was to the north of Holy Land Town. I need to find a way to get some money first. As he walked towards Riverwood Town, George began to plan his next move. He planned to stay in Riverwood Town for 2 days, buy some books about this world in the shops, and learn more about the real world. Then he would visit Whiterun, and finally take a carriage to Winterhold to study the magic of this world at the Winterhold Academy of Magic. Once he learned the magic of this world, he could utilize the energy within him. According to Ilevator, without using magic from outside this world, he wouldn't be so easily discovered. Moreover, the best way to gather knowledge of the new world was to learn its magic. Nothing was closer to the essence of the world than magic. But all of this required him to be wealthy. The problem remained, because he couldn't use magic from outside this world, he couldn't casually conjure gold and gems with his transmutation spell as he usually did. He had considered, as he left, whether to steal a few sets of Imperial soldiers' armor to sell, like in the game. But he immediately dismissed the idea. In the game, all the weapons and armor he stole could be sold at blacksmiths and general stores, but this wasn't a game. If he actually took stolen Imperial weapons and armor to a blacksmith or general store, he'd probably be arrested by the town's guards the moment he entered. Furthermore, he couldn't use his own little world or special magic, and carrying a large pile of weapons and armor was inconvenient. How about gathering some alchemy materials along the way? In the game, you can sell various potion-making materials gathered by the roadside. But looking around at the flowers and grass covering the ground, he rejected the idea again. Similarly, in reality, the ground is full of weeds, and having just entered this world, he couldn't distinguish which ones could be used to make potions. Chapter 647 The Bandits Blocking the Road. In the game, The most common roadside flowers are blue, red, and purple mountain flowers, which can be picked whenever you encounter them. In reality, there are countless flowers of various colors along the roadside, and many varieties of the same color, making it impossible to distinguish which are the true blue, red, and purple mountain flowers. The main reason is that in his previous life, George never learned alchemy in this game. It was too troublesome. He practiced enchanting as a mage, blacksmithing as a warrior, and restoration magic for healing. He had heard of the three-god cycle, but never touched it. This also meant that even based on his past life's impressions, he had difficulty finding the correct herbs. Looks like I'll have to be more aggressive, fight bandits or raid tombs, soon. George had found the most suitable way to make money. Outside the towns in the Elder Scrolls, there are many bandit strongholds, and you'll often encounter bandits robbing you on the road. With a little attention, the money will come easily. If you want even more, you can raid Nord tombs. Skyrim has numerous Nord tombs of varying sizes, containing many valuable treasures, magic books, and magical weapons. However, the numerous ghouls and traps within the Nord tombs deterred many adventurers and thieves. He remembered a large tomb on a mountain near Riverwood, where he should be able to find valuable items. It's much farther than I imagined. After walking at a normal pace for 2 hours, George still hadn't seen the 3 iconic standing stones and the Desolate Falls tomb from the game. In other words, the actual distance between Riverwood and Holy Land Town was much farther than he had anticipated. Looks like I need to speed up. With a burst of speed, George vanished in a blur, sprinting north at supersonic speed. Although his body wouldn't suffer from hunger or thirst, who would willingly spend the night outdoors, exposed to the elements, when they could enjoy a comfortable inn with drinks and music? That should be the Desolate Falls tomb. In the twilight before the sun had fully set, George spotted a striking Nord tomb on the mountainside to the northwest. This Nord tomb, named the Desolate Falls tomb, was a renowned tomb throughout Skyrim. Meanwhile, hidden within this great tomb is a stone tablet called the Dragonstone, which records the burial sites of the dragons that were once buried there. After Alduin was banished, all the dragons except for Pathunax, the dragon who aided humanity, were killed by humans in a united effort, ending the era of dragon rule. However, dragons cannot truly be killed. Because all dragons, including Alduin, originated from the dragon god Akka, and as long as Akka lives, they will not die. Even if their physical bodies are destroyed, their souls can be awakened again, allowing them to reform and resurrect. The only ones capable of killing Alduin and the dragons are the Dragon Soul and the Dragonborn. This is because the Dragon Soul and the Dragonborn also originated from Akka and possess the special talent of absorbing dragon souls. Therefore, when a Dragonborn kills a dragon, they can absorb the Dragon Soul into their body to enhance their own Dragon Soul and power. Once the Dragon Soul is integrated into the Dragonborn's body, it cannot be resurrected. George wasn't interested in the Dragon Soul. The Dragon Soul was absorbed by the Dragonborn, and after the Dragonborn's death, the soul returned to Akka, meaning Akka essentially reclaimed all its power. If you were to devour the Dragon Soul using the method of spirit control, he would inevitably anger Akka, resulting in more harm than good. Currently, he was about to advance to the single universe level and didn't lack souls or energy. His main focus was on collecting knowledge from different worlds to strengthen his foundation. His attention was focused on the fact that seeing the desolate waterfall tomb meant he wasn't far from Riverwood Town. I was just worried about tonight's lodging, and someone's delivered right to my door. Just as he was about to enter supersonic travel mode again, his ears twitched, and he suddenly slowed down, walking forward at a normal pace. Before he had walked for 5 minutes, a sharp arrow suddenly shot out from the nearby bushes, aimed directly at his heart. Such a ruthless attack. Then don't blame me for being impolite. George raised his right hand, caught the arrow between 2 fingers, and then threw it back, sending it flying back at 10 times its original speed. Ah! A scream immediately came from the bushes. Then, 2 burly Nord men, wielding iron swords and clad in leather armor, leaped out of the bushes with a whoosh, and with lightning speed, swung their swords at George's head. "You're courting death?" George completely ignored the swords aimed at him, raising his right foot and kicking out in 2 blurs. The 2 Nord men instantly coughed up blood and flew backward into the bushes. Stepping into the bushes, the 3 bandits who had ambushed George were now 3 corpses. The first corpse had been pierced through the forehead by an arrow, and the latter 2 had their sternums shattered, all George's doing. These three were clearly a small gang of bandits who frequently robbed passers-by or merchants on the roadside. Their equipment was mediocre, and their skills were average. George had noticed the three lying in ambush a few minutes earlier, which was why he had slowed his pace. In his mind, if the three were only robbing people and not harming them, he would at most take their money, teach them a lesson, and spare their lives. These three were clearly desperate criminals, their killing spree immediate and likely responsible for countless innocent lives. So he showed no mercy, instantly killing them all. Poor bastards, but enough for tonight's lodging. Reaching out, George felt around on the three bandits, finding over 100 septon. He didn't bother with their leather armor or weapons. The armor's defense was negligible to him, as were the weapons' power. They might fetch some money if sold. However, he disliked the blood on them and the time wasted on stripping them. He was only staying one night, and planned to visit the ancient tomb of Desolate Falls tomorrow. 100 septon should be enough, so he didn't bother. It's so inconvenient without magic. George couldn't help but sigh again as he continued on his way. No matter how strong one's physical strength, it can't compare to the subtlety of magic. If clothes get dirty, they still need to be washed by hand. You can't just wave them around and make them clean. He entered supersonic travel mode again, and after about 10 minutes, he stopped. Not in Riverwood, but at the location of the three standing stones. Skyrim has 13 special standing stones, said to be closely connected to the 13 constellations of Tamriel. Each person can choose one to activate, gaining positive buffs. Only one standing stone can be chosen at a time. To change its effect, simply touch another standing stone to activate it. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 648 Unexpected Plot. The Mage Stone, the Thief Stone, and the Warrior Stone. George touched each of the three stones, feeling their effects on his body, then shook his head. The effect is negligible. Normally, these three stones, aided by the power of the stars, could indeed accelerate the learner's learning speed for their respective professions by 20%. But that only applied to ordinary people in this world. Even if he concealed his energy, suppressed his spirit, and used only his physical strength, his actual strength remained unchanged. His power, comparable to that of a demon god, was beyond the reach of these stones. However, at his current level, even without the stone's enhancement, his learning speed was still terrifying. Passing the stones, George continued towards Riverwood Town. During this time, he encountered many wild beasts, especially the most common wolf packs. Because of his speed, those wolves, dangerous to ordinary people, would simply vanish like a gust of wind, leaving no time to react before George disappeared from sight. George didn't deliberately stop to kill the wolves. He didn't even bother to strip the dead thieves of their armor and weapons, let alone kill wolves to skin them and sell for money. As the last rays of the sun were about to disappear and night was about to fall, George finally saw a medieval-style town with wisps of smoke rising from its chimneys. Much bigger than in the game. At a glance, he realized that the real-world Riverwood was much larger than the Riverwood in the game. In the game, Riverwood only had a few households besides the blacksmith, the general store, the inn, and the lumberyard, but that was impossible in reality. Even the most remote town couldn't have only a few households, otherwise the blacksmith, the general store, and the inn would have no reason to exist. They would go bankrupt and have no market for their products. Cluck. Cluck. Resuming his normal pace, George walked to the south entrance of Riverwood and immediately saw a chicken wandering around there. "That's a chicken god. Don't mess with it, don't mess with it," he jokingly muttered, and then stepped into the town. Of course, a chicken god didn't exist, but this chicken was indeed the bane of most novice players, and even he had fallen victim to it. After experiencing a major event like Aldern and finally leaving the Holy Land to reach Riverwood, how could you resist the urge to try your luck at that chicken that keeps waving in front of you? You might swat it a couple of times, shoot an arrow, or cast a spell. However, the result is that you'll be immediately chased by all the NPCs in town, ending your life in a very frustrating way. Entering the town, George found it peaceful. A few children were chasing and playing in the streets, and the adults were busy with their own things. Seeing him, a stranger, in the town, they were curious but not particularly surprised. Riverwood, though remote, is located on the border between Whiterun and Falklands. Furthermore, Whiterun is the largest trading town in Skyrim, and it remains neutral in the war between the Empire and the Stormcloaks, attracting many merchants and adventurers every year. Therefore, strangers often pass through Riverwood, resting and replenishing their food and weapons. "I'll rest for the night first." He was heading towards the Sleeping Giant Inn, the only hotel in town, along the main street when three bald men blocked his way. "Lost friend. If you want to enter Riverwood town, you'll have to pay some money," the bald, burly man at the head of the group sized George up with a malicious grin. These three were notorious thugs in Riverwood town, spending their time fooling around, not doing anything productive. Besides sponging off their parents and asking for money, they liked to gang up on passers-by. They didn't dare mess with armored adventurers or merchants with guards. Their favorite prey was someone like the guy in front of them, not particularly strong, dressed in ordinary clothes, and unarmed. He was the kind of easy target with no connections. Of course, they wouldn't kill him, they just wanted to extort a few dozen septins to buy drinks. If he disobeyed, he'd get a good beating. Huh? What's going on? George was immediately stunned by this situation. It wasn't that he was scared by the three thugs in front of him, but rather that he remembered there were no thugs in Riverwood in the game. Riverwood had no guards before the dragon appeared, yet it was a very peaceful town. But this was reality. It wouldn't be unreasonable for thugs to exist here. If that were the case, it wouldn't be a big deal, but now he thought of another possibility. That is, perhaps this wasn't just the world of the original game, but possibly a world after installing mods. Because he vaguely remembered that his roommate's mod included a scene similar to thugs blocking the road. If that were the case, then he needed to be a little more careful. Although he hadn't fully mastered the original game, he at least knew most of the main storyline and DLC content. However, if mods were installed, it would be a different story. This game has so many mods that if your computer is powerful enough, it can completely transform the game into another one. In the original game, demons don't appear often, and their danger level isn't high, but many mod packs greatly enhance them, even allowing you to directly confront demons. There's also the adventure of love, the laboratory, and the monster girl. Well, actually, those later additions don't really have much impact. It's not necessarily a bad thing. He'll definitely have to deal with the demon god later on. If it's truly a unified world, it will actually make it easier to interact with the demon god, and he might even naturally enter the demon god's annihilation space. "Hey kid, didn't you hear me? I think you want to taste my fist." The thug leader raised his fist, the size of a sandbag, and waved it in front of George's eyes. The people around just shook their heads, neither speaking up to stop him nor stepping in. Although they weren't afraid of these thugs, getting entangled with them would be troublesome. George wasn't surprised by this. Mind your own business, that's human nature, the same in every world. Heroes who speak out against injustice and act when necessary deserve praise. But most are ordinary people with their own families and burdens, and they don't have much strength themselves. If helping leads to their own deaths, who'll take care of their families? Not helping is also a way of being responsible for one's family. There's nothing to say about it, and there's no need for moral blackmail. He himself is like that. When faced with similar situations, he helps if he wants to, not for any reward, but simply because he dislikes something. If he doesn't want to help, he simply won't. If someone tries to morally blackmail him, he'll take care of that person first if he's unhappy. Chapter 649 The World of the Mod Pack. Stop. Let go of that man. Just as George was about to teach the three thugs a lesson, leaving them crippled so they wouldn't dare to do evil again, an angry voice came from behind them. George turned his head and saw a young, beautiful, and energetic Nord girl glaring at them with righteous indignation. "Camilla, this is none of your business. I advise you not to interfere." The leader of the thugs narrowed his eyes when he saw the girl stopping him, glaring back defiantly. "Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite." Camilla walked over, drew a magic dagger from her waist, and stood in front of George. "The reputation of Riverwood Town has been ruined by you bunch of scoundrels. I've wanted to teach you a lesson for a long time. HMPH, you've got guts. Just wait and see next time." The leader of the thugs' expressions changed as he saw Camilla draw her dagger, but in the end, he turned and left with his two henchmen. They weren't afraid of Camilla. Her amateurish fishing skills by the river weren't anything to fear. But her brother was different. He owned the only trading company in Riverwood, a prominent figure in the town. Besides, Camilla had many suitors, and offending her would inevitably result in being taught a lesson by them. Especially that wood elf archer named Fiendel, who was said to have been a fairly skilled adventurer, capable of easily taking down all three of them with one hand. So offending Camilla for a stranger, or rather, for a few dozen septon, was simply not worth it. As expected, not the original, as Camilla chased away the three thugs, George's gaze locked onto Camilla's two smooth, straight, long legs. Nords are generally tall, even women. Camilla was nearly 1.9 meters tall, a full half head taller than him, a Britonian of average height. So her long legs were particularly noticeable. However, George's focus wasn't on her long, straight, and beautiful legs, but rather on the clothes covering them. Normally, in the original game, regardless of the town, ordinary people generally dressed quite conservatively. In his memory, Camilla wore a simple, belted casual dress with a skirt that reached her ankles, only revealing a bit of her collarbone. But now, Camilla's outfit, while also appearing as a belted casual dress, was clearly specially tailored, practically a bodycon skirt. Her bare thighs were completely exposed, looking incredibly sexy. This kind of effect was usually only found in modded versions of the game. Therefore, he could tentatively conclude that this world was definitely an Elder Scrolls world modified with mods. "Friend, are you alright?" After chasing away the three thugs, Camilla turned to George with a slightly smug look. Her dream had always been to be an adventurer, but her brother absolutely refused. She really wanted those three thugs to fight back, to have a proper fight, and prove her strength. Unfortunately, the three thugs were all cowards. "It's nothing, thank you, Miss Camilla," George nodded with a smile. He didn't need help, but since the young lady had helped, his attitude naturally wouldn't be bad. "How about I treat you to a drink?" "No, I have something to discuss with my brother. My family runs a trading company. If you need anything, you can come and take a look." Camilla waved her hand, then turned and left after casually promoting her family's business. George didn't try to stop her, but simply nodded and walked towards the Sleeping Giant Inn. Camilla was the most beautiful woman in town. If he tried to stop her, people would probably think he had some ulterior motive. Anyway, he was going to the trading company tomorrow to accept the Golden Dragon Claw quest, so this was a good way to repay her. Pushing open the door to the Sleeping Giant Inn, the first thing he saw was a Nord youth playing the piano and singing, surrounded by several townspeople drinking. It wasn't completely dark yet, so there weren't many people drinking. "Sir, are you here for a meal or a room?" A robust middle-aged woman from Brighton approached George, a stranger, as he entered the inn and asked with practiced ease. George glanced at the woman. This innkeeper was no ordinary woman. She was one of the hidden leaders of the Blade Order, her strength among humans not to be underestimated. This Sleeping Giant Inn was merely a secret outpost for the Blade Order to gather intelligence. The Blade Guards originated from the Dragon Guards of the Second Age, existing for a long time as the bodyguard organization of the Dragonborn Emperor Raymond after he established the Second Empire. At the end of the Third Age, after Martin Septim sacrificed himself in the Annihilation Crisis, the Dragonborn bloodline of the Imperial Emperors was severed, and the Blade Guard ceased to be a subordinate bodyguard organization of the Empire, instead operating as an underground organization. Now, due to the Platinum Treaty, they have become abandoned pawns of the Empire and are no longer officially recognized. However, this was irrelevant to him. He had no interest in the Blade Guards or hunting dragons. That was the mission of the Dragonborn. If he got involved, he would immediately attract the attention of the Dragon God Eka. 10 peps for lodging, and here's the menu for meals. The landlady led George to the counter and brought out the inn's drinks menu. George glanced at it, casually ordered some food and drinks, and then paid for the food and lodging, totaling 50 pepsins. Not bad singing. Finding a table to sit down, George ate his food while enjoying the performance of the Nord youth who was a bard. He knew the youth's name was Swan, known as the worst squire, but his singing was indeed good, and his lyre playing was also excellent. Well, he was just a bard, so his styling was normal. As the night wore on, more and more guests filled the inn. In the end, almost all the original inhabitants of the town had gathered here. Without television or radio, their greatest entertainment was drinking, chatting, and listening to music together at night. However, things weren't always harmonious. For example, the town's hunter, Fiendel, almost beat up the bard Swan. The reason was that both of them were pursuing Camilla, the younger sister of the owner of the Riverwood Trading Company, the Nord beauty who had just saved George. As dawn approached, Everyone dispersed and went home, and George also went to sleep in his rented room. His body no longer needed sleep, so what appeared to be sleeping was actually him transferring his main consciousness to other clones to study magic. Nothing eventful happened at night. The next morning, after having breakfast at the inn, George went to the entrance of the Riverwood Trading Company. Chapter 650 George, the weak and ordinary. I told you, I can do it. Even the whole Kabbalah gang combined couldn't beat me. You think they really can beat you? I said no. You're not allowed to take risks, and you're not allowed to mess around and catch those thieves. Then what's your plan? You can't just leave them like this. Tell me your solution. Alright, I've said enough. I'll find a way to solve this. As soon as George pushed open the door, he saw the brother and sister arguing. A customer has arrived. Seeing George enter the shop, the owner, Luke and Valerie, immediately stopped arguing. Camilla turned around and looked behind her, a look of surprise on her face. It's you. Are you here to buy something? She recognized George as the stranger who had almost been robbed by the Kabbalah gang yesterday. George shook his head and said with a smile, I'm an adventurer. Last night at the inn, I heard that you had been robbed and lost a very valuable item. I was wondering if you needed any help. You're an adventurer. PFFT, hearing George's words, Camilla covered her mouth, almost bursting out laughing. As the younger sister of the owner of a trading company in Riverwood Town, she had seen her fair share of adventurers. Bai Manchang had even accompanied her brother on several trips. So she was quite a discerning girl. She could tell at a glance whether someone was an adventurer or not. Judging from the young man's attire, no armor, not even a weapon, how could he possibly be an adventurer? If she hadn't intervened yesterday, he probably would have been soundly beaten up by Cabrera and his gang. I was just planning to post a quest notice on the inn's bulletin board these next few days. Since you're an adventurer, that saves me the trouble, Lucan said politely, narrowing his eyes slightly as he looked him up and down. He wasn't an ignorant person. He had managed to run a trading company in Riverwood Town and raise his sister without any background or help. Although the young man's clothes were ordinary, the aura he exuded, his manner of speaking, and his eyes suggested he wasn't an ordinary person. This world isn't just full of warriors with muscles bigger than brains, there are also mages who can use magic, and vampires and werewolves lurking in the shadows. So never judge someone as weak based on their appearance or clothing. You might encounter an old man who can barely walk, and he could summon lightning to strike you dead with a wave of his hand. A naive little girl by the roadside might be a vampire who has lived for thousands of years. However, even if this young man is just an ordinary young man who, driven by a yearning for adventure, resolutely joins this dangerous path, that's fine. He must bear the consequences of his choices. Ignorance comes at a price. It'll also be a good opportunity for his sister, Camilla, to see the consequences of becoming an adventurer, dispelling her constant dream of becoming one and for her to settle down and get married. Actually, after the golden dragon claw was stolen, he didn't originally plan to go back for it. Because he knew why the golden dragon claw was stolen. When he bought it at a high price, he knew it was related to the ancient tomb near Riverwood Town. It was said that this quest offered access to the depths of the ancient burial mound of desolation and the treasures of the ancient Nords. However, out of caution, he ultimately abandoned that plan, keeping it simply as a prized collectible. A few days ago, a thief broke into the trading post, taking nothing of value but the golden dragon claw. He knew it must be related to the treasure of the ancient burial mound of desolation. The ancient burial mound of desolation had buried countless adventurers. He estimated the thief was unlikely to survive, and the golden dragon claw was out of the question. However, Camilla was determined to find the thief in the ancient burial mound and retrieve the golden dragon claw. Therefore, to appease Camilla, he planned to post this quest at the inn in a few days, a quest he doubted anyone would accept. If an adventurer did take the quest and retrieve the golden dragon claw, he would be overjoyed. He truly cherished this collectible. I lost the thing, a palm-sized dragon claw made of gold, most likely in the hands of bandits near the ancient tomb of Desolate Waterfall. If you can help me find it, I'm willing to pay you 3,000 septon. Okay, I'll take the job. George nodded without hesitation. 3,000 septon was not a small amount. Converted to his previous life, it would probably have a purchasing power of over 100,000. The main problem was that while gold was valuable in this world, it wasn't as valuable as in his previous life. What was truly valuable in this world were magical materials and rare ores. In essence, Septon was like gold coins. Melting down 3,000 septon could definitely forge a larger dragon claw ornament. Are you crazy? He can't possibly complete the mission. You'll kill him. Camilla looked at her brother in disbelief. Lucan shrugged. He took the mission voluntarily. He's an adventurer, and adventurers' lives are always this dangerous. Now you don't have to catch the thief yourself, okay? At least I can be his guide. This gentleman probably doesn't know how to get up the mountain. Camilla gritted her teeth and replied, unable to argue with her brother. Lucan nodded. Sure, but you can't leave the town's boundaries. You can only go as far as the bridge. Camilla angrily pushed open the door and walked to the entrance. Seeing George follow her out, she took a deep breath and said seriously, what I'm about to say might hurt your pride, but I think for your own life, you should give up this mission. Well, actually, I'm quite confident in my abilities. George knew Camilla meant well, so he wasn't angry. It's like if you're dressed as a beggar and barge into a high-class hotel. Being stopped by the hotel staff is normal. They're just doing their job. There's nothing to say. To be upset and seek revenge is petty. Besides, Camilla was actually thinking about his life. That's the ancient tomb of Desolace. Not only are bandits and wild beasts lurking around its perimeter, but it's also said to be filled with terrifying ghouls and deadly traps inside. I've never heard of any explorer or bounty hunter ever returning alive. With your small frame, you probably wouldn't even be able to climb the outer snow-capped mountains. You'd either freeze to death or be eaten by snow wolves. Camilla assumed the weak and ordinary George was just trying to save face, so she immediately recounted the information she'd gathered over the past few days. George looked at Camilla with some surprise. So you still want to go by yourself? Since Camilla knew how dangerous the ancient tomb of Desolace was, why was she still insisting on going? Camilla blushed and explained, I know my own abilities. I just said that on purpose to get him to spend more money to hire powerful companions in Whiterun. That way, we can completely wipe out those bandits entrenched outside the ancient tomb of Desolace, and I can also see if I have the chance to join the companions. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.